woman, and she got along with everyone. And so people wanted to open up to her, and that's why I think she quickly integrated into Worthy and loved living there.
Joanne also has a successful career at the local council where she manages their healthy lifestyle service. After 6 years there, she's risen to become the public face of their healthy living campaigns.
She was quite a bright, some would say brilliant person who had a quite substantial job working with the local authority and really independently minded in some respects.
Just a lovely woman who did wonders for the council. Everyone loved her at the council, and no one had a bad word to say about her.
Ian Hamer, Joanne's husband of 27 years, works as a self-employed business consultant.
He worked in many businesses and earning money here and there, and to sustain a reasonable living, you know. He had a nice place in Worlby, quite an expensive area to live in, so he must have been doing okay in his profession, I guess. They seemed to be happy with each other. Friends and family said that there was a good couple for the large part. Married a long time, nice family, 3 kids. It was all seemingly going well.
But what seems like an idyllic life is about to change.
Humberside Police, what's your emergency?
Humberside Police are called after Joanne fails to turn up for work. Her elderly mother has also been trying to reach her, to no avail.
They did speak most days, if not every day, because her mother was very ill as well. And Joanne used to help to look after her. And that raised sufficient concern for her to ring the police.
There were concerns about her welfare. The alarm bells were raised.
And a concern for welfare incident was generated, which resulted in the police attending.
Police make their way over to the family home. When they knock on the door, there's no answer. So the officers break in. When they search through the house, nothing could prepare police for what they find in the master bedroom. Joanne Hamer's lying lifeless on her bed.
Medical professionals will have been called immediately. You know, monitors would have been placed on to see if there's any signs of heart trace or anything. Any chance whatsoever that resuscitation could take place.
They had discovered she was dead. It's apparent she'd been killed from the scene, the way she was left, and there was blood at the scene as well.
Joanne had been strangled by her dressing gown cord.
That's when we're looking at securing evidence within that scene.
Teams of police descend on Worlby. The quiet village has never seen anything like it.
When I came back from work, there was police cars, vans, and I'm saying, what's going on? What on earth's all the police doing here? Something happened, and then when I got home and my daughter texted me and said she'd seen it, that there'd been a murder. I just couldn't believe it. I was so shocked that something like that would happen in a lovely village like this. You don't expect it.
As word spreads fast through the neighbourhood, the local newspaper gets wind of an incident in Worlby. Reporter Charlie Wilson heads to the scene.
So you're like, OK, we've got a big story. Let's get there first. Let's be quick. Let's be first. So we got down there. We were the first people there. Very quickly, it was evident this could be a very serious, scary incident. I've never reported on a murder before. That's the first time that's happened to me. So it was a case of doing it really delicately, respectfully, and just trying to build up what had happened, really.
Soon, the news is spreading beyond the boundaries of the village.
Maybe an hour later, you get the likes of ITV, BBC, Sky coming down, and that's when it was like, whoa, OK, people out on the road, like, wondering what's going on. Yeah, everyone was shocked to see the amount of media attention.
You just don't get this sort of thing in these sort of villages.
Yeah, I was quite shocked, really. You would never think that something would happen in a small community like this. I couldn't believe it.
Everybody was shocked. It didn't seem right. Something like that would happen here. You hear about it in cities, but in a little quiet Lincolnshire village, you just don't expect it at all.
Joanne's family are left devastated by the news, and her colleagues at work are also reeling.
Truly sad. I spoke to a few of them. They were just in pieces. Of course they would be. Their colleague who they loved dearly, and they really did love her. It was tough for them, it was very tough.
And it dawns on Joe's village that there's a killer living in their midst.
I think some people were a little bit upset. They were locking the doors a bit more quickly.
I think the first reaction is alarm, because when you hear there's a murder but you don't know the circumstances, and it can frighten people into thinking we've got a killer at large who's going to cause more trouble. You're quite fearful about what it could mean and what the implications for the future are.
It was very awful to hear that it had happened in our village. It's frightening, it really is.
With fear spreading quickly throughout the village, Humberside Police needs to work fast to establish who committed this horrendous crime. And first, they look at Joanne's home life.
This marriage on the surface, to all intents and purposes, would have looked like a stable, normal marriage without too many problems. The reality was quite different.
What I heard was that their marriage wasn't great by the people on the road who lived there, because they had heard things happening, let's just say, whether it be shouting, fights.
It turns out Joanne and Ian had recently had a trial separation, but then Joanne decided to return to the family home.
Joanne Hamer had sought to see if she could give the relationship one last chance. This was part of her trying to make the relationship work.
This new information puts husband Ian in a new light.
Maybe Joanne tried to keep certain things to herself to hide what was really going on at the home to save her marriage.
With Ian Hamer nowhere to be seen, police suspicions are starting to build.
We do know in this particular case that a neighbour had reported an argument in the morning between them.
I spoke to the woman who heard the incident at around 4 o'clock in the morning, around that time. She had heard screams, shouts for help.
And then the argument ceased.
Police launch an urgent public appeal to help them find Joanne's husband. They need to track down Ian Hamer, and fast. In the quiet Lincolnshire village of Worlaby, police have launched a murder hunt. Mother of 3, Joanne Hamer, has been found strangled in her bed. Husband Ian has mysteriously disappeared since a row reported by neighbours in the early hours of the morning. And this doesn't seem to be the first either.
I guess people on the road had heard these things where it really went bad, to say the least. None of the neighbours who I spoke to liked him at all.
With Ian Hamer now under suspicion, Humberside Police make an urgent appeal for his whereabouts. They release the details of his car, a white BMW 5 Series. They also warn the public not to approach him.
Once a decision had been made by the senior investigating officer that Ian Hamer was a suspect for this crime, then a manhunt would have taken place. They don't know at the moment where he is, but there would be certain fast-track actions raised to secure his arrest. You know, checks with family and friends. Where does he usually go to? Where does he work? Checks with hospitals as well. If he's got a mobile phone, has he made any calls? We may be able to cell site to where he's located and instigate an area search. He's clearly got use of a vehicle in this case. So, you know, we've been putting the vehicle details onto the automatic number plate recognition, the ANPR system. And as soon as that vehicle passes an ANPR camera, then that will send an alert to the police. all these inquiries made to trace and arrest Ian Hamer.
He plainly was the last person with her and had disappeared from the scene. So the investigation then was focusing on building that picture around what had happened between them. And then going further back, what had happened between them, not just on that night, but also in the period leading up to this.
Detectives put Ian Hamer under the microscope.
The picture that emerged from witnesses was of somebody who was supremely self-assured, self-confident, and superficially was, or at least on the face of it, was somebody who was quite engaging and interesting. But those same people always spoke about, the more they got to know him, there appeared to be another side to him. And they also described how, over time, he could present as being very self-interested and, I suppose, conceited. So there was somebody who could, when he wanted to present in a way which was superficially attractive, but the more people got to know him, there was to him which was unattractive in terms of him being controlling, perhaps aggressive.
And after speaking to Joanne's family and friends, it turns out Hamer has a checkered history.
There have been a number of previous reports made indicating domestic violence. You know, he was reported to have ripped up her wedding dress.
Those reports of him tearing up a teddy bear, which was sentimental to her.
You know, this is really significant in a case such as this.
The police had been called out on many occasions, but as is so often the case, they weren't really ever progressed. Part of that was because of the approach of the family to try and manage what was happening within the family. The personality of Joanne Hamer was, tragically, to try and make it work at all times.
When you're married to someone for so long, you want to, make things work. And she shouldn't be wrongly thought about for wanting to make her marriage with her husband of 27 years and 3 children work. It's just that he was so far gone and so far twisted.
There are a number of occasions where she left him, but he managed to persuade her to come back. And I've investigated, sadly, domestic homicides where controlling and abusive husbands have tried to isolate their wives, and we know that Hamer did this and, dissuading her from contact with family and friends.
In 2013, police discover this came to a head when Ian Hamer started divorce proceedings, blaming the involvement of Joanne's mother in their relationship.
So, he was antagonistic towards his wife's relationship with her own mother. So he was all about controlling and being abusive towards his wife and driving a wedge between her and family and friends. And it just shows this controlling and coercive and bullying and domineering nature of Ian Hamer towards his wife within that relationship. And that isn't uncommon in domestic homicide cases, sadly.
It seems the couple reconciled, but then in 2017, things take another turn for the worse. Ian Hamer starts accusing his wife of having affairs. Police analysis of Joanne's smartphone reveals something even more sinister. Around this time, Hamer hacked into his wife's handset so he could track her every move.
He would apparently follow her to work, follow her on nights out with friends, monitor her phone on where she was going, where she was at, wouldn't let her do certain things, apparently, wear certain things, and she was a bit closed off.
This is how obsessive he was about his wife and his jealousy and his thought processes, that he wanted to accuse her of extramarital affairs.
And a probe of the couple's bank accounts shows Ian's disturbingly tight grip over her purse strings.
He was keeping money from her, basically, I guess sort of giving her an allowance of what to spend and what she could do. Wouldn't let her go out at certain times. all the bearings of, you know, a toxic, horrible relationship. Obviously, she felt trapped. She felt like she needed to get out, and she tried to do that. He wouldn't let her.
In the weeks before her death, Joanne had moved out and was considering buying a property. But she was persuaded by Ian to return 2 days before her murder. It was on this day, the 4th of May, that police background checks reveal a disturbing incident. Ian Hamer had been arrested for drink driving.
As well as being controlling and abusive towards his wife, he seemed to be losing control of his own life in some respects. He was drinking more heavily. So there's a clear pattern there of his own destructive behaviour escalating within himself, and particularly abusing alcohol as part of that process.
Investigators discover it's not only drink that's fueling Hamer's abusive behaviour.
He had a cocaine problem that had become prevalent in his life over the last 2 or 3 years, and that became worse and worse and worse. When he picked up this addiction, maybe his personality changed because of that, and his health, mental and physical, deteriorated.
Businessman Ian Hamer's respectable lifestyle is now questionable. And when they learn what he did in the hours following the estimated time of Joanne's murder, they're convinced they have the right man. Soon after that last blazing row reported by neighbours, Joanne's mother said she had an unsettling phone call with her son-in-law.
When family members tried to contact her the following morning, he told them that Joanne Hamer couldn't speak to them because she was unwell, and as he framed it, she had a sore throat.
Chillingly, police believe Joanne was already dead when Hamer made that calculating comment.
Just, like, sick. Like, strangle her, and then you got to tell her mum that she can't come because she's got a bad throat. Like, sadistic. Like, horrible. When you hear that, it's just like, I don't know what to say. Horrible.
And it appears Hamer used the same story again.
His son had attended at the marital home at a time when Joanne Hamer was probably dead, and that's when he first introduced that concept of her having a sore throat, when he knew she'd been strangled and she was probably dead.
He also told his son as well, when he was at the house, to go and buy some lozenges because his mother was sleeping, she had a bad throat, knowing full well that he'd strangled her, which now we know what happened, was particularly chilling in this case. To say that she'd got a bad throat, I mean, how callous is that?
And therefore the question is, was that him being cruel, or was it him buying time?
This cunning ploy tells police they have a calculating killer on the run, who wants to stay one step ahead of them. But it's only a matter of time before a false move by Hamer would reveal where he's hiding. Worleby, North Lincolnshire. Murder suspect Ian Hamer is on the run after his wife Joanne is found strangled in their bedroom.
And this is a man who, at this point, everyone in the area is looking for and knows that, okay, this is a manhunt.
As police cast their search net wider, reporters like Charlie Wilson are on the ground looking for leads. Suddenly, that morning, there's word from nearby Barton-upon-Humber.
We heard news that there might be an incident in Barton where he might be. And so we went to Barton and then heard he was seen near a pub.
Barton is about 8 miles away, and it's quite big, quite a lot of people, so it's the obvious place to go. You've got the Humber Bridge. From the Humber Bridge, you've got the whole of Yorkshire to go into and disappear. It would be a logical place to go.
A resident next to one of the town's car parks spots a man behaving erratically.
He was basically swaying around in the car park, making noise, acting strange.
Not realising it's Humberside Police's most wanted, Ian Hamer, the woman calls 999 to report a disturbance.
I think she reported that he was on Spice and shouting. Obviously, he was actually drunk, intoxicated on whatever he was on. He would wander around the car park, shout.
A lone patrol officer heads to the car park to move this wild drunkard on.
Police basically just found a man shouting and being strange and realised this is Ian Hamer. Arrested him straight away.
The officer single-handedly tackles Hamer to the floor, then restrains him whilst he radios for assistance.
I have to say the actions of the officer that arrested him were exemplary, you know, real bravery shown in tackling this individual. And when he was arrested, you know, he actually had to detain him. This is a rural force. It's not an inner-city force with the same number of resources.
Meanwhile, roving reporter Charlie Wilson is close by. Suddenly, he's alerted to the breaking news.
A woman sent me a picture of a man on the floor being sat on by a police officer. Okay, that's our man. So we know exactly where it is. I'm actually at a shop getting a drink of Lucozade. Run around with my Lucozade in hand. So I arrive at the scene. Ian Hamer is being sat on by a lone police officer, waiting for his fellow officers to come. So to come round the corner and see a police officer sat on who we believe is Ian Hamer was just wild, yeah.
After struggling to contain Hamer for nearly 5 minutes alone, backup finally arrives for the officer.
They must have came, got half a second after I came round the corner, and then police swarmed on him, got him away, and sort of like ushered us away. Clearly intoxicated, drunk or drugs or both, not in his right frame of mind, in the clothes that he was wearing the night before. We get him up, handcuff him, escort him to the back of the van.
Meanwhile, news of an arrest for Joanne's murder filters back to her village of Werleby. Residents can now breathe a sigh of relief.
I was just pleased he'd been caught for the crime, but to then find out that it was her husband, it was a real shock.
Detectives start to piece together what Hamer's been up to in the last 24 hours since fleeing the murder scene.
He went off on what can only be described as a drink and drugs binge. We know that from the inquiries that were made. Laughing and joking, you know, certainly no signs of remorse or distress.
Bar owner Pauline Dickinson had reported serving Ian Hamer. But when he arrived on her premises, she had no idea he was on the run.
He came in the pub around 5:30, never seen him before, asked for a pint of Carling. He got his pint of Carling and went and sat down out the way of everybody.
Next, Hamer returns to the bar and starts to hit the spirits. Soon the conversation heads in a strange and unsettling direction.
Put the tequila on the bar and he literally looked either side of himself, leant over the bar and said to me, "Why did the Mexican push his wife off the cliff?" So I did the same as he did, looked either side and said, "To kill her?" He went, "No, you know it." I said, "Yeah, I do." He paid for his drinks, went and sat down. He came back to the bar 10, 15 minutes later and stood there.
Then Pauline clocked something sinister.
He hid his arm behind, but I'd already seen that he'd got scratches. I don't know which way, it was just you could see scratches on his wrist. One of our customers noticed scratches as well and went, "Oh, he's one of those who's been harming. One of my customers said to him, "Hey up, mate, what are you doing in here? Are you from here?" He says, "No," he said, "I'm not from here. I'm just going through a breakup with my wife." So he went, "Oh, right, sorry to hear that, mate." He went, "Yeah, she's taken me for all my money." So he says, "Don't be sad." He said, "Have another drink." So one of the customers bought him a drink.
Over the next few hours, Hamer knocks back the drinks, laughing and joking with the regulars.
So he did about 2 more jokes to the point where the customer said, "No wonder your wife left you. If you've got jokes like that," he went, "that's maybe why she's gone then."
Quite significantly as well, he was seen to take his wedding ring off. So he knows what's happened. He knows that his wife's dead. So, you know, that's quite a significant gesture. And that was done, you know, merely hours after he'd actually killed his wife. And it just shows the kind of individual that he is.
Some of the pub regulars seem unsettled by this customer they've never seen before, who has struck up conversation with another man at the bar.
My 2 regulars, they finished their drinks. I went, "Right, you 2 go in." I went, "No, we're not going." Says, "Why?" "We're not leaving you with them 2. We don't know the other guys, so we're not leaving you with them." I went, "Oh, don't be daft. What are these 2 going to do to me? I'll soon have them out the door, don't worry." So they went, "No, we're staying." So they stayed.
Soon the bar's regulars saw glimpses of another side to their joking acquaintance, who's going by a false name, Sebastian.
So we played pool against one of my regulars, who is a really good player. And during the game, there was banter going on. But right at the end, when the customer knew he was going to win, he picked up the broom that I'd got out ready to clean up and potted Black with the broom. Which Sebastian said, "That is so disrespectful to do that." He said, "I don't think so, I still won." I don't think he was very pleased and finished his drink, and he did actually walk out. You just get a feeling about people. You know if they're not okay. I don't think he would have done any harm, but who knows?
Next morning, Pauline's alerted to the terrifying news on Facebook that the customer she had served the night before isn't called Sebastian, but Ian Hamer. And he's wanted by police for murder.
My reaction was, "Oh my God." So I phoned a policeman that I know, and within 5-10 minutes, I think, they'd got him.
Soon the joke Hamer told Pauline about a man pushing his wife off a cliff takes on a sinister new meaning.
It was weird, but they were just jokes, like, you know what, a kid would come home and tell you jokes, but it's not until the following day, and I actually thought to myself, it's as if he was trying to tell us something. I don't know. It's not until the following day that things fell into place.
Despite his intoxicated state, Ian Hamer engages with the police at the point of his arrest.
He says something like, it wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. Something along those lines. I heard the word manslaughter.
He did make a very significant statement, an unsolicited comment to the officer indicating that he wasn't guilty of murder. It was diminished responsibility, so he was already offering up a statutory defence to murder.
After 24 hours on the run, Ian Hamer has been arrested in North Lincolnshire on suspicion of murder. Just hours after killing his wife, Joanne, Hamer was spotted in Pauline's bar, just 7 miles away from the crime scene.
You just would not have thought he'd actually killed his wife. and just come blazingly into a bar a few miles away having a drink. When you hear them things, it's like, really? Could you be so cold-blooded and heartless?
When police take him in for questioning, Hamer repeats his claims that he committed manslaughter due to mental illness. But one throwaway comment soon after his arrest suggests this is a cunning ploy to reduce any impending prison sentence.
And what was a telling piece of evidence? He said to the officers who were tending to him, this was manslaughter, and asked this question: have we done enough for diminished responsibility? This was a man who was trying to present a picture of being so mentally unwell that he was not to be held fully responsible for his wife's death.
This is clearly somebody who's a very manipulative, selfish individual. And his response, he's already trying to escape justice for his crime as soon as he's arrested, and he's clearly given a great deal of thought to that before his arrest. And Ian Hamer clearly only cares about one person, and that's Ian Hamer.
In spite of Hamer's claims, he's charged with his wife's murder. Months later, mental health experts are brought in to provide a true picture of Hamer's state of mind.
After his arrest, he was subsequently interviewed by Sue's psychiatrists to explore whether there were any mental illness elements that would lead to diminished responsibility.
They ask him probing questions about his relationship with wife Joanne.
He began to present what was ultimately going to be his defence. He accepted he had killed her, but in the context where he said he didn't want to do it, and used the phrase that it was some sort of psychotic episode.
Then Hamer starts to go on the offensive, claiming he is the real victim in the abusive marriage.
Ian Hamer claimed that his wife had taunted him to say that their children weren't his. He made a slur on his wife's character, saying she was engaged in extramarital affairs. There's no evidence of this.
He would say that she would see other people, that she would be on dating apps and she would find other men more attractive than him. And anyone who knew Joanne knows that that's just completely laughable and a joke. She was the most loyal woman you could meet. Just sort of making up excuses in his head, I guess, to find ways and motives to do what he did.
Then his claims turn even more extreme.
He made plain that he was himself a victim of domestic abuse. You know, he claims that she hit him over the head with a shoe. We've got no information about any injury, or certainly any serious injury to him. He claims she threw a phone at him. Again, there was no injury that we're aware of to support that. This was all seen as a tissue of lies. And clearly the people that knew Joanne had not seen any evidence of this whatsoever. And the only person who could suggest that this had taken place was Ian Hamer himself.
But soon, the psychiatrists start to uncover Hamer's true colours.
What was actually found by two psychiatrists, one diagnosed him with morbid jealousy and one with obsessive jealousy. But clearly, there wasn't an element of diminished responsibility for his actions. From the facts we know about the case and his behaviour and his actions, come as no surprise, because we can see the way that he jealously controlled his wife's movements and behaviour, you know, a real controlling nature.
And when detectives scan Hamer's smartphone, the picture he painted as the victim starts to crumble. Just days before Joanne's murder, they find texts he sent to another woman promising jewellery.
Things he was doing, he would accuse her for. He was seeing other women, that came out. He was on dating apps. He would accuse her of the things that he was doing exactly the same.
We do know that Ian Hamer had affairs, he had one-night stands, and he accused his wife of the same. There's no evidence to suggest that that was the case.
But investigators are blown away when they uncover the name Hamer uses on his dating profile. It sounds strikingly familiar.
He'd use a fake name. Sebastian, apparently. He would use to women wherever he was going to maybe go out on these dates and meet people. And yeah, to use a fake name, like you're obviously up to something that's not good.
15 months after Joanne's murder, husband Ian Hamer is finally put on trial at Hull Crown Court. He pleads guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But the prosecution sets out the case for cold-blooded murder.
So it was a consideration for the jury whether that was a man demonstrating real symptoms of mental illness, or whether it was somebody using any illness to formulate a defence.
The court is told the torrid details of the abuse Hamer inflicted on his wife.
The question that was raised with the jury is whether or not, by the time of the killing, he in effect wanted to get rid of his wife so he could move on, but he needed control of that situation, and that's how we presented the case.
As the trial progresses, even Hamer's own children take to the stand against their own father to describe the abuse suffered in their own home.
One of them spoke of being aware of that from a very young age. It had become increasingly toxic and abusive. You then see the horrible human side of this, because they're being required to give evidence against one of their parents, and in circumstances where they've lost the other one. And for them, there's no good outcome to any of this.
Following a heart-wrenching 3-week trial, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
The verdict of the jury was that Ian Hamer was guilty of murder. Therefore, they rejected that idea that his mental state was such that he was not able to exercise proper judgment and control.
He designed everything, including his response to the arresting officer, to make out that this was the case, that it was diminished responsibility. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy that, and they saw through Ian Hamer's excuses for what they were, just excuses.
Hamer's jailed for life with a minimum of 22 years. At the time of sentencing, the judge takes into account the years of domestic violence Joanne suffered at the hands of her husband and his abusive control over her finances.
The judge actually commented that he believed that one of the main motives in this case was he was afraid if the relationship ended that he would lose a significant amount of money. Money to which Joanne, in the law of England and Wales, was entitled to. Those were the family finances that should have been split accordingly. He didn't want that to happen, and he murdered his wife as a result.
Kill someone, go out drinking, using drugs and joking about what he did. He obviously deserves to be locked away for the rest of his life, and I'm glad that's the case.
Killers like Ian Hamer are so manipulative and so self-centred, and ultimately it led to the tragic death of a lovely, caring wife. But there's only one person to blame for that, and it's Ian Hamer.
Years later, the sadness of the case is still felt by those in the quiet Lincolnshire village of Worleby.
There'll always be some weird, I guess, aura for people still living there, knowing that what happened in that house happened, the worst crime you can commit. And I guess it opened a lot of people's eyes to thinking that it's going to happen anywhere.
I feel so sorry for the family. You know, one act like that and it's wrecked the family. And it's something they'll have to live with, I'm afraid to say, and it's not very nice.
Ian Hamer is definitely a master manipulator. A lovely woman who was taken away from us by a horrible, sadistic man. It was something you never expected to report on, especially in Worlby. I never met Joanne, but I know she's a lovely woman. I know that, you know, she deserved a lot better than Ian Hamer. Truly sad story, a sad situation. All you can do is just hope the best for the Hamer family, of the children. Just an awful situation which Ian Hamer will spend the rest of his life in jail for.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, and neither on Monday.
The only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
When details started to appear of what had actually happened, it causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death.
A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know?
I live every day with the fact that I was friends with a murderer.
At the edge of London lies the village-like suburb of Kew.
Kew is one of the most sought-after areas of London. It's in West London.
Kew is an extremely wealthy area. It's within commuting distance of the City of London, and it's wonderful nature beside the river and the Royal Botanic Gardens.
It's very leafy, it's a very well-to-do kind of area. It's fairly low crime as well. So it's a nice area for people to live in.
There is definitely a villagey feel. We have a very small high street. You will find a lot of independent trades around Kew, which I think that's what people like.
There's a lot of artists and TV celebrities, and of course Sir David Attenborough lives there. It's a world-class site.
Kew was the perfect place for aspiring French filmmaker Laureline Gossier-Bateau to set up home in 2009.
Laureline was my best friend, my close friend. She was like a sister to me. We always be united. We always be in touch. We just developed a friendship, more than a friendship. Our children called her Auntie Lolo, and my daughter has her name. She was family.
She was a vivacious, very popular, well-liked young woman who was beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. She was easy to like and was a very caring and considerate kind of person.
The future seemed bright for Laureline, and London was the place to help make her career ambitions come true.
She was born in Aix-en-Provence, but she came to London to pursue her dream of becoming a film producer.
Laureline had a lot of passion, but she developed a real passion for cinema. She was a passionate people. She was a determined people. She was a hard worker. She started her own production company. She got a Grammy as a production assistant on a movie with Dame Joan Collins. For us, it was nice and amazing, but I know for England was a dream, and it was a dream.
Despite a successful career, Laureline was happiest at home with her dogs.
Laureline was a dog lover. She loves animals. She had an Instagram of a video every day with her 2 dogs, Haley, a Husky, and Blake, a Rottweiler. Okay, so nice. They sleep on the bed, and we see that on Instagram every day. It's like they're her children for her.
And on top of her busy life in the UK, Laureline stayed in regular contact with her family in France.
Laureline was very close to her family. Oh yes, she used to call her mom every day and maybe twice a day, in the morning and the evening. So the family for Laureline is everything. Family and friends and pets was everything.
In March 2019, Laureline was due to move out of her flat in Kew into a new place. Something friends and family were eagerly waiting to hear about.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, neither on Monday, and it was already strange.
Certainly raised alarm bells the fact that Laureline had not spoken to her best friend and her mum and her family, when she would normally speak to her mum every day and speak to her best friend very regularly as well. So the only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
But there was something unusual about Laureline's texts.
Her friends had received some strange text messages from her that didn't really chime with the kind of person that they knew her to be. For example, her best friend said that she thought it was strange that she said that she was going on a shopping spree in Oxford Street because she knew that she usually shopped online and got all her clothes from online retailers. She'd described how she was looking forward to getting a boob job and liposuction. Certainly not the kind of thing that she would have said. So this kind of thing immediately raised alarms, and they were very, very concerned that she just seemed to be communicating by text message, but nobody had seen her.
Confused by Laureline's strange behaviour, her sister-in-law makes her way to the property in Kew.
And when she couldn't find her, she alerted the police.
Laureline was reported missing on the 6th of March 2019, and that means that a police officer would be dispatched to talk to her about her concerns and take a report. The missing persons inquiry started with questions to her sister-in-law and potentially any friends that could be found to say, have you seen her? Can you tell us when you last saw her? And the concern was raised because her sister-in-law had visited the address and she could hear dogs barking, Laureline's dogs, and no sign of Laureline. Laureline was a lover of dogs, so she would never leave her dogs alone. They were her children, essentially, at the time. And also, because it was now Tuesday, Laureline had failed to turn up for work, so work colleagues were now concerned. So you had a lot of people voicing their concern about where Laureline was, and that made it a concern for the police because this was completely out of character and completely unusual behaviour.
Police begin their inquiries by also visiting Laureline's address.
In a missing persons inquiry, police will attend an address, the place where a person lives, because within that premises you might find something to indicate where they've gone. It might be a ticket, it might be a receipt, it could be anything. And also you want to make sure that they haven't come to harm behind locked doors. So there would be a natural instinct for officers to get into that premises, and quite often that's by breaking in to check on the welfare of somebody, and that's what they did in this case. The officers went in, searched the premises, and she was not anywhere. But what officers could see inside that address was the boxes all still ready to be packed.
It looked as if she was just about to move out. Her belongings were all boxed up, ready as if she was about to move out of the flat straight away. So it looked like the home had been disrupted in some way.
Back at the police station, officers assess the risk of Laureline's disappearance.
A missing person is graded low, medium, or high risk, and different things happen at different levels. In the low risk, you've got people who perhaps there's no particular harm that you can think, they might just have gone away, and the concern is quite a low for them. Medium risk, slightly more work is done around that because people are concerned, but it might be within their character to go away for a weekend or something like that. So it's not necessarily out of character. Whereas you have the high risk category, and that's where Laureline sat, because this was completely out of character.
After reviewing the case as high risk, police returned to Laureline's address for a more detailed search.
They went out into the garden using torches. And in the garden, they had a look around and they could see various items leaning up against a fence, so a spade, shovel, other items that you would use in general gardening, and a bag of compost as well on the right-hand fence. And one of the officers then turned attention to the flower bed on the left-hand side as you walked into the garden and noticed that it was completely brand new in one section. The CID officer moved the soil back closest to them and identified what they thought was the shape of a foot sticking out in essentially a shallow grave. And just a few more scrapes to see what was there made them believe that what they had found was indeed a body.
Police searching for missing French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Bateau have discovered a body buried in her back garden.
As soon as you find a body in a shallow grave in a premises, it becomes a murder inquiry straight away because that person doesn't put themselves there. And that's when the process of the team start to make their own inquiries, and all the different actions that come out of that initial deployment begin in earnest.
With a murder investigation in progress, police secure the scene.
We had a lot of this area all cordoned off, a lot of crime scene tents here, because as you bring items out of the garden as well, you need to put them somewhere which is forensically sterile. And so we tried to utilise the area out the back of the premises for that reason. So here really behind the house, the alleyway that we used, and trying to set up a forensic retrieval here was quite difficult because the wind was so strong that it was hard. And obviously knowing how detailed you've got to be and how, to avoid any contamination because it is windy, and also you're dealing with an outside scene, it's particularly more complex than you would expect an inner scene to be.
Arrive on scene, having been called by the homicide assessment team, usually, and we'll receive a briefing from the local borough police about what the incident involves and why it may be suspicious. Once we've had a briefing, we'll be wearing protective clothing, mask, overshoes, gloves, scene suit, and entering the scene to look for to see what has occurred.
The crime scene manager is in charge of that scene forensically, whether they be physical exhibits that are taken out of a premises or whether they are swabs or fingerprints. They're in charge of running that scene.
The recovery of the body is totally down to the archaeologist, and he'll work in tandem with an anthropologist. Their speciality is bone analysis, who died, how they died and where they died. Working together, they can rapidly maximise the recording, interpretation and recovery of the body.
As the team removes several inches of soil, it becomes clear that the individual is in fact female.
Obviously, your first thought is, well, Laureline Garcia Bartu is missing, and we have a body in the garden, and it's suspicious that she's missing. So, obviously, my thought is straight away, well, this is probably going to be Laureline. But you don't go to a family with probablys. You have to be sure.
As forensic archaeologists continue digging, the level of brutality on the victim becomes clear.
Once the body was removed from the ground, she was lying on her back, naked. She was wrapped in a mattress, and there was silver duct tape around the area of where the knees and the neck were. The mattress was then wrapped in a cord around the middle of it, but around her neck she had an electric wire. She had a head bag on, and her arms were tied behind her back with duct tape. You could surmise that she'd been strangled, or the cord had actually caused her death. You couldn't see the rest of the body to determine what else was there. She may have been stabbed for all we knew, but that wouldn't be able to be looked at until we got to the mortuary.
As the body is taken to the mortuary to establish a cause of death and identify the victim, news of a murder spreads.
For a young woman's body to be dug up in a garden in Kew, it would have been, almost unheard of in a neighbourhood like that. A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
I haven't ever heard of a murder in Kew.
It's quite shocking to hear a murder in Kew. It's not normally the norms of anything.
When details started to appear of what had happened, people become very concerned about, something that's happening in your neighbourhood. It causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
At the mortuary, the post-mortem gets underway.
Once the body arrives for the post-mortem, he would look at both sides of the body for any bruising, any wounds, anything that stands out to him. There was no obvious bruising around the neck, but once you get the body opened up and get under the skin, then the bruising can be seen. Be checking the hyoid bone, the bone under the neck, see if it's fractured, and then it results in the conclusion that death had been compression of the neck, believed via strangulation.
With a cause of death established, it isn't long before the individual is identified as none other than Laureline Garcia Bartu.
I was in my car alone, and I just remember that it was Laureline's mother I had on phone. So I just say the word, is it her? Is she dead? And I hung up. I remember I screamed. I never screamed like that. It's taken a part of me. She was like my little sister, It's taken a part of me.
The investigation into Laureline's murder ramps up and initial theories are considered. Could this be a burglary gone wrong?
It's a very attractive area for a burglar because there's a lot of assets there.
So if someone's forced their way into the address and killed somebody, and then that person has disappeared, we need to identify them as soon as we can. So we'll be looking to make a light source examination, any finger marks that are not seen to the naked eye. Fingerprint examination. We'll be looking for any DNA that we can find, possibly cigarette ends. Things have been moved by the suspect. He may have opened drawers, cupboards, so we'll be looking to examine those, DNA. He may have cut himself somewhere, so he may have drops of blood that he's left behind.
But a closer examination begins to cast doubts on a suspected burglary.
If it had been a burglary gone wrong, you wouldn't expect them to hang around and attempt to hide the body in the way that it had been.
Police take into consideration Laureline's plans to move home around the time of her murder.
Could the movers have been involved? Could it have been a handyman that had, come round and helped box up her belongings?
After making their inquiries, police discover that no removal firm had attended the address. So focus switches to Laureline's personal life.
Certainly from her communication with her friends, it was suggested that when she'd last spoken to her sister-in-law, she was looking forward to going on a date with a vet that she'd met. But it was very unclear whether that date had actually taken place or who he was, even. There was very little information given. Who had she been talking to online, on dating apps? Maybe she met somebody else. That was certainly something that could be unravelled through looking into her mobile phone and computer.
Police decide to try to look into Laureline's last movements to see if they hold any clues.
You look at things like Laureline's finance, so where has she spent money, which indicates that she might have been to a certain place, like a restaurant, which we found out on Friday the 1st, she'd been to a restaurant, and then that venue itself has CCTV.
The CCTV shows Laureline dining with a man, with the pair holding hands. And inquiries with those closest to Laureline soon identifies him.
Laureline was in an on-off relationship for quite a number of years with a man called Kirill Belarusov. And this relationship had been going on for 8+ years, but had kind of fizzled out a couple of years beforehand, but they still saw each other on and off. And so they were aware that Kirill was in the UK as an Estonian national, in the UK to come and help her move that weekend.
Police continue to scour CCTV around the area. Both are later seen on bus CCTV, heading in the direction towards Laureline's home in Kew. It seems Kirill may have been one of the last people to see Laureline alive. But when police try to locate him, they find they are too late.
They had discovered that Kirill was actually no longer in the UK. He had flown to Tallinn in Estonia.
Belarusov has left the country.
Police investigating the murder of Laureline Garcia Berteau want to speak to her ex-lover, Kirill Belarusov, as he may have been one of the last people to see her. But police discover that he has left the country.
The CID officers got in contact with Kirill Belarusov via a telephone number they had for him, which was given to them by the family. And they made contact straight away. He behaved like he didn't know what had happened, and the last time he saw her, she was alive.
Kirill tells police he was helping Laureline move on the Saturday, before she left Kew to move to a new address. But when asked further about this last encounter with Laureline, he doesn't give clear answers.
He was being obstructive, in our opinion. He kept avoiding the question. I wanted him back in the country because I wanted to speak to him face to face, but he kept making excuses why he wasn't coming back, or saying, yes, I'm just going to sort it out, and then nothing would happen. He could do everything he could to come back. He was saying he'd be back on one day, that day would go past, we'd ring him and he'd say, I couldn't make it, I'm going to do another day, and this just kept pushing back and pushing back. And you get to a point where you think, well, that's enough. I know he's trying to avoid him coming back.
I think the fact that Belarusov is not keen to help the police in their inquiries, considering that Laureline had been his partner for the best part of 10 years, is extremely suspicious. And the fact that he left the country around the time of her disappearance as well would have raised alarm bells.
Kirill Belarusov soon became the #1 suspect in the inquiry.
But with Kirill refusing to come back, police need to apply for an extradition order.
The police have a fairly complicated process to get someone back from another country. The British police can apply for a European arrest warrant, which is what they did. So they applied to get Belarusov back from Estonia, where he was at the time.
But for the Crown Prosecution Service to agree, the police need to prove they have enough of a case against Kirill.
When you get a European arrest warrant, as this was, when you bring them back into the country, you have no power to interview them. So you have to do everything without asking them a question, which is very, very difficult because you're not giving, firstly, someone the ability to explain, but also you have to reach that threshold of evidence, which means that as soon as they set foot back in this country, you can charge them straight away with the murder.
With police needing to build a firm case against Kirill, they start to dig into his life.
I met Kirill whilst working in a nightclub. It was called Egg, and we started working together, and that's how we met. Kirill was very charming. He was very nice. He was not, arrogant or trying to tell his side of the story. He was always waiting for you to ask a question before bragging or saying anything. Kirill told me about Laureline when we met. He didn't say her name, but he mentioned that he had an ex-girlfriend that he was really in love with, and that they broke up.
But Sabrina recalls how Kirill later spoke in more detail about his and Laureline's relationship and claims she had cheated on him.
He mentioned that he'd had cancer before and that he couldn't have babies anymore, and that one time his ex fell pregnant and she didn't know that he couldn't have babies, and that's how he found out that she cheated, and that's how the relationship ended. He would always say that it was his fault and that she was very caring and that it was hard on her, the fact that he had cancer. So he wasn't blaming her, but he was saying that's how they ended it.
Sabrina remembers the last time she saw Kirill before he left the UK for his home country of Estonia.
The last time I saw Kirill, he told me before that he was going to die, that his cancer was terminal, and that was the last time I was ever going to see him. He said he sold his house, I'm about to die, let's go dinner. And I went to that restaurant crying. I cried most of the night saying, I'm going to lose my friend.
With police still unable to question Kirill to see if his account of his illness is true, they turn to Laureline's finances to try to establish her whereabouts the weekend of her murder.
Through continued interrogation of finances, we see that on Saturday, round about 10:15 in the morning, that there are transactions in Pets at Home and Sainsbury's, all local to where Laureline lived. So again, officers are there as quickly as possible to identify CCTV opportunities. And there you see Kirill Belarusov with Laureline again. So now we know he's with her in the morning.
At a glance, all appears to be fine. But when police look at Laureline's finances a day later on the Sunday, there appears to be no sign of any purchases. Instead, they look into Kirill's finances.
So we start to look at transactions that Kirill might have made as well. And what you could see on Sunday the 3rd of March was Kirill had left premises and had gone to a local retail park, similar to where Laureline and he had been the day before. He'd been to Sainsbury's, been to Homebase, and been to convenience stores through that morning, and was purchasing items which were highly suspicious. They were the rubble sacks that matched the rubble sacks that were found on Laureline's body. He had purchased an axe, which we never found, and he had purchased soil, or compost as it was. And you could see the CCTV of him, identifying him clearly as the person purchasing those items. And so you could say straight away then that it's very, very clear what he was up to. That was now that Laureline had been killed and he was thinking of ways to dispose of her body.
With Kirill's behaviour raising suspicions, police approached the CPS.
We had to go to the Crown Prosecution Service and prove what we had using all of the information we had, CCTV, finance, witness statements, the crime scene itself, the condition of Laureline's body, and that was something which is very, very difficult, but we were able to prove at that point that we had enough evidence to secure an arrest of Kirill Belarusov. And that gives you the ability to get a European arrest warrant and bring them back. He was brought back on the 20th of March and charged with the murder of Laureline. Kirill Belarusov will go to court the following day, to a magistrate's court, where, because it's murder, they send it to the Crown Court, and then he's due to enter a plea some 8 weeks later. And that plea is not guilty. So we knew at that point we are going to trial with him at some stage in 2019.
And as the case is prepared for trial, potential witnesses are called in by the police and prosecution.
The police called me saying, we want to talk to you about your friend Kirill, and I thought they were calling me to say that he was dead. They told me he's been arrested, he's killed someone. I was in shock. I was like, are you sure that it is the right person? And they said, yes. You don't murder, you don't think that you knew a murderer?
Kirill Belarusov has been charged with the murder of his ex-partner, Laureline Garcia-Berteau. The trial begins at the Old Bailey in London, and the prosecution open their case against Kirill with DNA evidence from the crime scene.
The flex that was used to tie Laureline's hands behind her back, you could see that flex on the floor in the living room where it had been cut. And indeed, the forensic testing showed that Kirill Belarusov's DNA was at the cut part of that flex.
The jury hears of the early relationship between Laureline and Kirill.
At the beginning, she called him my Superman. He's tall, very helpful, especially with women, you know. He came to spend a few days with Laureline at my home. He ate at my parents' table. He was a Superman. A good boy.
And Kirill had even boasted of his career achievements to Laureline.
He had told people he was a stuntman and that he'd worked on films with famous people like Brad Pitt, and that he was training people. We searched in the industries at Hollywood, and we searched in the UK, IMDb, to see where was he in these films, and they're always shown if you work on there. He was nowhere to be found. These were all complete and utter lies that he told everybody.
But the lies did not stop there.
He began to say to lots of people that he was sick and that he had 10 years left to live.
He didn't talk much about his cancer. You would ask him questions and he would say, I'm bleeding from every hole. I've been puking for the last 3 days. I think it's just once where I said, if you don't mind me asking, what is the cancer? Where is it? And he said, oh, it's the pancreas, it's the liver area. And then the time after, he would be like, oh, it's spread everywhere. But he would never give any more details. He'd just say, I'm a guinea pig. They've opened me up and stitched me. They keep on opening me up. But he wasn't very specific.
Laureline's mother, friend, and I found it very strange because he has nothing in front of us. When we saw Kirill, my wedding day or for a holiday, we can't imagine he's sick.
I've never known someone who had cancer. So when I saw him with a shaved head, I didn't question it. I didn't think he still had eyebrows. And I didn't know that you lose your eyebrows when you have chemo.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know. We were suspicious. We tell that to Lowline. We explained to her to open her eyes, but she was in love.
And we were discovering that almost all of his entire life that he told people about was a complete lie. Saying you've got cancer when you don't have, for me, is the lowest of the low.
The prosecution also reveals to the court more about Kirill's double life.
Every time he suggested he was going in for treatment to a hospital in London or just outside of London, what he was actually doing was going to stay with another girlfriend in London. That girlfriend also was told the same lie by him, that he had cancer. So when he was not with her and saying that he was away for a few days, he was going to stay with Laureline.
It's only when I sat down in court that I realised that he was texting the three of us at the same time, his girlfriend, Laureline and me. So it was really like juggling between the three of us. With me, he was supposed to be in Russia having treatment, and then he was actually in London seeing Laureline, talking to Laureline. I felt like a fool. I felt so stupid. It was so shocking.
The prosecution described that as Laureline's film career began to take off, Kirill may have looked towards her with envy.
He wanted a career in films as well, to a certain extent. He wanted to be a stuntman, but he wasn't, and he couldn't have been because he didn't have the skills to do that. His only skill was lying, whereas she was genuinely talented, and she was very, very hardworking, and she was prepared to earn her place in her chosen career. So I think there probably was an element of jealousy in the relationship.
But it's details of a debt owed to Laureline which could point towards a motive for murder.
She had given him so much money over the course of their relationship, and we knew you were talking plus £17,000 at least at that point. And that was getting to the point where he had to pay that money back. In November 2018, Laureline had sent a message to Kirill, and this was saying, you don't realise how much in debt, how much in trouble I am. I can't pay my rent. You need to pay me the money back. And from friends and family, we would always hear stories where he would promise this money. It's coming, I've got this job, this stuntman job, whatever it might be, which was all lies. So he knew he could never pay that back. That could be one motive. Secondly, she was at that point in her life now where she was ready to move on, away from him. And she was effectively a source of income for him as well. And that was about to dry up.
To the court's surprise, Kirill gives evidence.
I think the most shocking about the trial was himself. He took the stand and spoke, and it was just, I think it lasted 2 days, and it was 2 days of horror. Every word that was coming out of his mouth was horrible. The way he talked about me, the way he talked about Laureline, the way he saw himself, the arrogance in his voice. I remember sitting down terrified because I had been so close to him and just thinking, that man is a monster. It was traumatizing.
I always think about the people over the years that have been in front of you in a trial, and he's probably right up there as the most evil looking eyes I think I've ever seen. And because behind it you can see that he really doesn't care. You know, his image and what he's portrayed himself as is more important than anything else. And he was really, really unpleasant and arrogant beyond belief during the entire 4-week trial at the Old Bailey.
The court hears how in March 2019, Laureline begged Kirill one last time to pay back what was owed to her. But instead, he used this opportunity to kill Laureline.
You have the timeline of them going out on the Friday night, which we can see. We have the timeline of them going shopping on Saturday morning. She had booked a removal company ready for Saturday, but she didn't know where she was moving to because Kirill Belarusov had said he has found somewhere for her to move to. She had no money because he owed her a lot of money. She kept asking him, where am I going? And you could see that through telephone contact. Well, where is this address? I need to tell my removal company where we're going. And so the removal company basically said, well, I can't move you to nowhere. So it was all cancelled. Kirill Belarusov comes up with a new lie. He's organised a removal company for her.
But the removal company never came.
And you get to the point then where Laureline is panicking because she doesn't know where she's going, and she's clearly getting to that point in the evening where on that Saturday she's starting to disbelieve what he's saying. And that's when everything goes quiet.
It's at this point that Kirill strangled Laureline with a cord. And the following morning, he was seen in local shops purchasing suspicious items.
Kirill had been out and bought these items on the Sunday morning, which were used to cover the body of Laureline.
After returning to Laureline's home to bury her body, Kirill used her phone to send fake texts to Laureline's friends and family to buy some time.
He foolishly used Google Translate to try and reply to the family members in French, and obviously it's not going to sound very credible. It's not going to sound like Laureline, not the words that she would use, and the translation was extremely clunky, so it was immediately quite suspicious.
And at the time that those messages were being sent, he was using the Wi-Fi of the address itself. So that puts him inside the address using her phone, sickeningly looking at pornography at the same time he's sending these messages, knowing full well that in that house is Laureline's body. And that really shows you what kind of person he is. It's very difficult to comprehend a person who has that kind of personality, that very strange and almost psychotic personality.
By the time concerned family and friends of Laureline get in touch with Kirill about her disappearance, he's leaving the country for Estonia.
I put my phone with video with him. I saw that he was in the airport. So I asked him, you are in the airport and your lovely Laureline is missing. Why are you leaving? He's no explanation, but he leaves.
After a grueling trial at the Old Bailey, the jury returns its verdict. Kirill Belarusov is found guilty of murder and is sentenced to 24 years in prison.
About the verdict, we can't say that we are happy because our friend will never come again. But we are grateful for the jury and the judge to having seen him the real way he is and to not allow him to do that again to another woman.
But even with Laureline's killer behind bars, the impact of his crimes are long-lasting.
Today, we are more mistrusting. Today, when my friend meets a man, I want to know everything. I want to know where she is, the address. It's changed all of our life.
This entire story definitely had an effect on me. He destroyed so many lives, not just Laureline's. So many people that have been touched by his lies, so many people that believed he was such a nice person. And I think we were all a bit destroyed because we were all fooled and none of us saw anything. And if just one of us saw something, she could still be alive.
When a routine call to a house fire turns into the biggest murder investigation in Welsh history, you know you're in for a chilling ride. New Murder in the Valleys starts Wednesday at 9.
She was a young woman who had a whole life ahead of her. Everybody was jittery, wondering what had happened to her.
Clearly a very dangerous person. This is the real whodunit.
Crimes don't really happen here. She'd been placed inside a suitcase. This was a brutal, horrific murder and an awful way to leave the body of a teenage girl.
I've been a criminal lawyer for over 30 years, and I've never dealt with a case like this before.
To have 3 trials is very rare, but the case was of such importance.
He would have walked free. And given what he had done before, we were in no doubt that he was a dangerous man.
Nestled in the southwest corner of Kent, the so-called Garden of England, this is the leafy, historic town of Royal Tunbridge Wells.
I would describe Tunbridge Wells as a safe family sort of location, wealthy and middle class.
There's a really low level of crime in the area. I feel very safe walking around at night.
People enjoy a very peaceful life on the whole and generally go about their business.
Tunbridge Wells is your archetypal Middle England. It's picturesque, it's surrounded by beautiful countryside. Crimes don't really happen here.
But that picture postcard image was about to be shattered. Kent police receive a call about a missing person, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds. The day before, Easter Monday, Terry had arranged to meet her boyfriend, but she never showed up.
This was really out of character. She stayed in contact with her boyfriend regularly. She texted him on the hour almost, and he did the same back to her. They sent multiple texts to each other each day. So the fact that she did not text him was really unusual and set the alarm bells ringing.
Terry's boyfriend sent her 20 texts, but she never replied to any of them.
Her boyfriend got concerned, tried to phone her, didn't get any response, and then alerted her mum. And her mum then reported her missing to the police.
This disappearance was out of the ordinary for the happy-go-lucky teen.
She was bright and intelligent. She had 8 A-grade GCSEs. She was fiercely independent. She was a teenager who was turning into a young woman.
She decided to spread her wings, leaving home at just 16 to live in a housing association hostel in the centre of Tunbridge Wells.
She had aspirations to be a nurse. She was waiting to join college. She was too young to start training at that point to be a nurse. But from everything that we've heard, she was a caring, lovely, independent and headstrong, her mother said, but a young woman who had a whole life ahead of her.
She was very popular, lots of friends, was a girly girl. They described her as always liked to look nice, took care of herself.
But those friends were all equally puzzled at her disappearance, the only lead police have. She was 5 miles away in the town of Tonbridge when she last made contact.
She was in touch with her boyfriend, and she'd been to Tunbridge for the day, and she said, "I'm in Tunbridge Park, I'll be coming back soon." And then she didn't arrive back in Tunbridge Wells. So we started doing some searching in Tunbridge, because that's where she was last heard of.
So police cast their net wide, searching parks, old buildings, rivers, anywhere the missing teen could be. But the trail runs cold. With no other options, police appeal to the public and press for help. Her disappearance makes a big splash across the local media.
Tunbridge Wells is a place where crime doesn't normally happen. It's a tranquil place. So when a teenage girl goes missing, it becomes a news story. And Terry was just 17 years old. She had a mother, she had a boyfriend. So that's a story of local significance.
Terry going missing was really shocking for the people of Tunbridge Wells, and people were extremely worried. Everybody was jittery, wondering where she was and what had happened to her.
It's a closed community, people talk, so if there's something that does happen, then word does spread quite quickly.
It's 10 days since Terry went missing, and still no word from her. The family makes another desperate appeal to the public.
As time passed, we get more and more concerned when someone doesn't stay in contact. And what we were really more concerned about with this case was she'd not been in touch with her mum. Her mum would tell us that Terry always would respond to her. Even if it was a, I don't want to talk to you, she would get a response. So when that didn't happen, obviously the concerns were raised.
Concerns are also rising across her close-knit hometown of Tunbridge Wells.
I think as the days went by and Terry was missing, fear started to grow that something terrible had happened to her. And there was a big community effort. There were posters everywhere. The taxi drivers all carried flyers. And there was even an information point by police for two reasons. One, to gather information, and other reason to try and reassure people, because there was a lot of worry at that time.
In the meantime, police have been trawling through hours of CCTV footage close to where she was last seen, in the nearby town of Tonbridge. Suddenly, there's a breakthrough. Terry is spotted at Tonbridge railway station on the day of her disappearance.
When we checked the CCTV, we actually found that she had actually got on the train to go to Tunbridge Wells. And then checking the CCTV at Tunbridge Wells railway station, we found that she had got off the train at Tunbridge Wells. So at that point, the searching moved from Tunbridge to Tunbridge Wells.
The investigation suddenly picks up pace in the hunt to find the missing teen. Police now draw up a search plan using this new CCTV sighting.
The last sighting of Terry Edmonds was at Tunbridge Wells rail station, where she got off the train at 6:23. So she walked across here, and Terry was never seen again.
Investigators plan a search grid around this last known location. The hunt leads to the supermarket car park opposite the station. On the 12th day of Terry's disappearance, there are reports of frenzied police activity on wasteland next to the car park.
This area was absolutely cordoned off. There were police everywhere, police vehicles, so the public had absolutely no entry. They closed the car park off while forensics were working at the scene, so this was an absolute no-go area for the public.
The search teams had made a grim discovery.
The suitcase was discovered under a vehicle ramp going into the car park. And when the searching officers opened it, they found a young lady's body. She was in a fetal position in that suitcase.
This young woman appeared to have been mercilessly strangled.
She'd been placed inside a suitcase that had been well hidden behind a wall, a squalid, desolate and dirty spot to leave a young girl's body. This was a brutal, horrific murder.
When the suitcase was found with a body inside, I think it was the news that everyone had been dreading in a way. I think most of us had that sinking feeling that it was going to be Terry.
Police in Tunbridge Wells have been searching for missing teen Terry Edmonds. On the 12th day of her disappearance, they make a gruesome discovery under a car park ramp close to the station. The body of a teenage girl is found stuffed into a suitcase. She'd been strangled.
This was a brutal, horrific murder, a desperately tragic and awful way to leave the body of a teenage girl. The person who killed her had no sense of humanity to leave a teenager in such a position.
The body in the suitcase was found behind a wall, just here. Immediately, police taped off the area, and there were lots and lots of police officers, forensic teams, sifting through the area looking for evidence.
Police are in no doubt that the body in the dark green suitcase is tragically Terry's.
We had to go through formal identification process, but we knew from the description that that was Terry in the suitcase.
The next day, the body is formally identified as Terry Edmonds. The news rocks the idyllic town of Tunbridge Wells.
To hear that she'd been murdered and her body found in such an awful way, stuffed into a suitcase, I think people were absolutely horrified and so sad.
Terry's disappearance quickly turned into a murder investigation, and that really sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of Tunbridge Wells. It scared people, primarily because she was a young teenage girl, but also because there are many parents in Tunbridge Wells who feared that there could be a killer on the loose.
To quell residents' fears, police presence is stepped up across the town. Investigators hit the streets, carrying out door-to-door inquiries for any leads on the killer.
Kent Police followed a lot of lines of inquiry. They had 50 police officers working on it. They were talking to quite a few people in relation to her disappearance and death.
The post-mortem reveals horrifying injuries to the young teen.
The details of the post-mortem were shocking, they were horrific. And as a seasoned journalist, it was upsetting. Terry had endured a really brutal and violent attack. She had been physically overpowered. She'd been raped, and she'd suffered a number of injuries. And her last moments would have been truly horrific.
The post-mortem examination showed that she had grazes on her back and she'd been strangled.
Terry was strangled by a scarf that she was wearing. She looped it through, and by pulling it tight, he'd strangled her. She had some facial injuries where she'd taken some strikes to the face as well.
And she was probably smothered with a pink sheet, which was found away from the scene.
Blood is found on this mysterious pink sheet, which is retrieved with Terry's trainers and her cigarette lighter in a pile of rubbish close to her body. They're sent off for analysis at the lab. But it's the suitcase that police hope could be the key to finding her killer.
Once the body had been removed, then the suitcase itself was considered as a crime scene. And that crime scene was essentially packaged up carefully and submitted to the Forensic Science Laboratory for examination.
Police hope testing for traces of DNA could provide answers to some of their biggest questions.
Initially, we were looking to see where the suitcase had come from. Could we have an owner of the suitcase? Could that be a big clue for us?
Whilst the lab pores over the suitcase, the spotlight falls on the person who raised the alarm. Terry's boyfriend. New evidence comes to light about a fallout with his girlfriend.
The last person that the police were initially aware of that had spoken to Terry was her boyfriend, and they'd had a row. Bearing in mind, most murders are committed by people that are known to the victim.
Samples of the boyfriend's DNA are also found on Terry's body.
Police investigating the disappearance of 17-year-old Terry Edmonds have today made an arrest.
Detectives arrest Terry's boyfriend at his home in the nearby village of Hadlow. He's taken in for questioning.
He was living with his mother in a house in Hadlow, and when he was arrested, police went to his property, uniformed officers were stationed outside, and forensic officers went into his house and conducted a search all night.
But eventually, this would draw a blank.
They did release him without charge because it was quite clear he was not involved in any way, shape or form. And it was clear he was at work, and there was no way that he was involved.
With the boyfriend eliminated, police focus on the suitcase. Forensic scientists have been putting their star piece of evidence under the microscope, and the suitcase has yielded a significant lead.
We recovered various samples, including a sample of DNA from the retractable handle. And the retractable handle had like a little switch on it. So we recovered material from that switch, and that DNA profile matched an individual that was of interest to the police investigation. That was a light bulb moment in the investigation, because we felt that, you know, that would lead investigatively to the identification of a suspect.
So police make a second arrest, and the man is brought in for questioning. It's a turning point for the investigation.
That suspect, in this case, turned out to be the previous owner of the suitcase. Now, that person then gave information to the police to say, that is my suitcase, but I gave that suitcase away. I believe, actually, it was given to the Salvation Army, so a charity donation.
As the police hit another brick wall, the clock's still ticking, and there's a brutal murderer on the run.
Clearly a dangerous person, clearly a very dangerous person, and trying to get them. This is the real whodunit.
So detectives have to go back to the drawing board, refocusing their efforts on the location where Terry was found. The car park. Through their inquiries, investigators discover it was often part of her regular journey through town.
And she used the car park as a short cut-through, if you like, to make her way back to the hostel that she was staying at, that was just at the rear of the car park.
Though nothing on the police's CCTV trawl shows Terry's last suspected steps through it.
There was no CCTV in the car park itself, but there was CCTV at the exit, and she wasn't seen to leave. So we checked everything, double-checked it, triple-checked it. We couldn't see her leave.
Police can now prove Terry never left the car park, which means she must have been killed there. They double down their efforts to find out who else could have been using it on the Easter Monday evening she went missing.
We had to look wider, and we were looking at other people. And within the car park in Tunbridge Wells, there were some people that we called the rough sleepers. They were homeless people who'd found certain areas of the car park, stairwells of the car park, that they used as accommodation. And on those stairwells, certain people sleeping rough there on cardboard mattresses, sleeping bags, duvets, that kind of thing. We started looking at those people to see if there's anyone there was of interest to us. We made inquiries to the rough sleepers in the car park. Did any of them own a suitcase? And they all denied it.
But intelligence from an officer on the beat suggests otherwise.
A local police officer told us that he knew of one person who had a suitcase. And we looked through our records and we'd spoken to that person, he denied it. So there was a reason why he denied being the owner of the suitcase.
With their suspicions raised, detectives head straight back to the car park. They need to find the rough sleeper whose story doesn't quite stack up.
We then went and spoke to him again. He said he did have a suitcase, but someone had stolen it, and it was kept in the stairwell. Someone had emptied his clothes out from it, and the suitcase had gone.
But for investigators, something about his story doesn't seem right. So they arrest him. Perhaps this new suspect could blow the case wide open. In Tunbridge Wells, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds has been found dead. She was sexually assaulted and dumped inside a suitcase next to a car park. Police have made another arrest. A local homeless man has been brought in for questioning. 21-year-old Philip Bell.
He confirmed that the suitcase that Terry was in was the suitcase that he had previously owned. And we asked him more about it, but he insisted that the suitcase had been stolen.
Nevertheless, there were little glitches in his story that were starting to cause the police concern, and that's when they started to kind of zone in on him as a suspect.
Although police can find no evidence that their victim, Terry, knew Bell, they realise this isn't the first time he's had a brush with the law.
Philip Bell came to Tunbridge Wells from Salisbury, and he sort of set up a base in Tunbridge Wells.
He had left school at the age of 15 without any qualifications and had started living on the street. He got involved in petty crime. He became a drug dealer.
Philip Bell had been in Tunbridge Wells for about 2 years, living rough, and he was heavily into drugs, so cannabis, crack, speed, solvents. So he was a big drug taker and just drifting around, really.
And Bell's transient lifestyle puts him at the location where police believe Terry met her fate. The car park. Through their inquiries, police are told Bell had set up home on the landing of one of the disused stairwells. In the basement of that stairwell, forensic investigators find something sinister, with a link to Terry.
She had some dirt, some debris on her, inside her clothes, that was directly linked to the bottom of the stairwell. And at the bottom of that stairwell, her blood was found.
The fact that her blood, her being in that stairwell and injured was really important because it identified the attack site, essentially.
So police have found their murder scene. But during questioning, Bell denies he was ever in the stairwell, or even the car park, at the time when Terry disappeared.
He told them that he had nothing to do with Terry's murder and that he hadn't even seen her.
However, when investigators seize his clothes, something raises their suspicions.
Having taken his trousers, they noticed that he had grazing on his knees, and that was consistent with him being astride Terry when he assaulted her and grazing his knees.
Now, he said he'd done that playing football. Now, we interviewed all the people that he used to play football with, and none of them ever remembered him actually falling down or hurting his knees whilst playing football in the time frame we were talking about. So again, that disproved part of what he was saying.
Although the case against Bell is beginning to build, the evidence is largely circumstantial. Detectives still don't have enough proof to charge their prime suspect with murder.
With there being no other evidence at that particular time, we had to release him on bail whilst we carried out other inquiries.
It's a blow for the investigation. Just days later, searching for answers about her daughter's death, Terry's mum once again makes an emotional public appeal.
I am begging you, please, if anybody knows anything, however little, get in touch, because anything to help catch the person that's done this will help.
Over the next months, detectives worked 24/7 in the hope to get the potentially dangerous Philip Bell back behind bars. They doggedly trawled through hours and hours of the town's CCTV footage for anything that could link him to Terry's disappearance. Suddenly, something catches their eye.
It was sometime later we were looking at more of the CCTV and we found Philip Bell. We'd found him walking past the railway station and going into the car park just a few seconds after we suspect Terry had gone in.
Although we never saw him and Terry together, it was clear from the timing that he followed her in moments after she went into the car park.
Police now have proof that their suspected killer and his victim would have crossed paths. And that's not all.
We then, about an hour later, we had CCTV of him leaving the car park. So that sort of brought us to a conclusion that she'd gone in, he'd gone in shortly afterwards, he'd come out, but she hadn't. So that added to our suspicions that he could have been responsible.
For the investigation team, this is really big. The new CCTV blows apart Bell's claim that he wasn't at the murder scene at the time of Terry's attack.
Initially, when Philip Bell was arrested and interviewed in May, he denied that he'd returned to the car park. Although there was no CCTV or eyewitness accounts from what happened within the car park, the CCTV was absolutely crucial because it demonstrated that Terry and Philip Bell were effectively on a collision course as they entered the car park.
Detectives also spot something strange about Bell's clothing as he leaves the car park.
When we suspect was the hour in which Terry was killed, he came out wearing a different pair of jeans. And we're able to identify that from CCTV because one pair was baggy and one pair was slim-fitting. So we were asking why had he changed that clothing?
Soon, investigators come up with a sinister theory.
Our theory was that he had got blood on his trousers, taken and disposed of those trousers, and changed them in that hour. Because why else? Why would you suddenly change your trousers halfway through the day?
Could this explain Bell's change of clothing? There was only one way to find out. Philip Bell is re-arrested and questioned by detectives once again.
He maintained that he was not in the car park around that time on that day. He was then shown the CCTV, which put him in the car park for an hour and him leaving that car park. And he admitted then that he had been in the car park that day, and he actually admitted that he'd been in, it was called the Lonely Staircase because there was no exit from it to any main part of the car park. It was where Terry was actually killed.
But Bell is adamant he never saw Terry or took part in her attack.
Philip Bell had said during that hour between him going to the car park and him coming out of the car park, he'd been in his sleeping area smoking quite a large amount of cannabis.
What he said was that he was, his words, stoned on cannabis, which was illegal. That's why he lied to the police about where he was.
During that lost hour Bell couldn't account for, he claimed to have smoked over 7 grams of cannabis. But evidence from a drug specialist would blow holes in his story.
We were able to disprove that through the use of a drug expert who was able to analyse the CCTV of him walking in and him walking out, and saying, walking out, he was not under the influence of cannabis, such as would have been the case if he'd consumed what he said he had.
It seems the suspect who claimed he was high was walking far too steady on his feet.
He couldn't be walking in that way if he was smoking a large amount of cannabis in a short period of time.
For the team's advisors at the Crown Prosecution Service, the case against Bell is beginning to stack up.
CCTV evidence was absolutely key in this case because it provided evidence to undermine Mr. Bell's initial account that he hadn't returned to the car park. And it also gave us evidence that he changed his clothing as well during what we called the lost hour between him entering the car park with Terry and then leaving the car park after he'd murdered her.
Meanwhile, the forensics lab also has exciting news. An item of Bell's clothing that was seized during his first arrest has also yielded a result.
In the CCTV of Philip Bell in Tunbridge Wells, he was wearing a very distinctive hooded top. It was a Fat Farm hoodie. And that hoodie was submitted to the laboratory for examination. And on it was a blood stain. It was a very small blood stain, about the size of a penny, that matched Terry Edmonds.
And the lab finds more evidence on Bell's belongings that were seized by police in the stairwell where he slept. On his sleeping bag, 2 large stains of blood. Through DNA testing, these are also confirmed as Terry's.
It was absolutely pivotal in the case because it demonstrated that there was a very clear link between Terry Edmonds, her being injured, and the belongings of Philip Bell and that stairwell.
To add to that, the pink sheet found near Terry's body, that's suspected of being used to smother her, throws up more clues in the forensics lab.
Not only did it have the blood of Terry Edmonds on it, but it also had a very partial footwear mark, and that footwear mark was matched to Philip Bell's training shoes. So collectively, and I suppose circumstantially, things were starting to build as a case against Philip Bell.
Is this the final nail in the coffin for the prime suspect? Forensic investigators find a semen stain on Terry's underwear. That's a partial DNA match to Philip Bell.
Today, a local man, Philip Bell, has been charged with the murder of Terry Edmonds.
With the evidence stacked against him, the 21-year-old homeless drug dealer is charged with the murder of Terry Edmonds. The news spreads through the town of Tunbridge Wells like wildfire.
It meant for the first time we could actually legally name him as the man in connection to Terry's murder.
When Philip Bell was charged, I think there was enormous relief that perhaps they had found Terry's killer. Before that, there had been a little bit of impatience from the public.
Next day, Bell appears at Sevenoaks Magistrates Court charged with Terry's killing. The scene is set for his trial at Crown Court just 3 months later.
So when there was this breakthrough and it was publicised, I think people felt finally Terry's killer will be brought to justice.
In Tunbridge Wells, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds has been found strangled and sexually assaulted, then stuffed inside a suitcase. With the evidence stacked against him, 21-year-old homeless man Philip Bell has been arrested and charged with her murder. He's spotted on CCTV following Terry into a car park, and his hoodie has a stain of blood belonging to his victim. Detectives have built up a chilling theory of how he carried out the attack.
He tried it on with her, she refused, and he then attacked her, killed her, and sexually assaulted her. But having done that, he was a homeless person with no car. He had no means to get rid of the body, but he had a suitcase. So he put the body in a fetal position in the suitcase.
A year after Terry's disappearance, Philip Bell's trial begins at Maidstone Crown Court. He pleads not guilty to her murder.
The thing that struck me about him was he was completely emotionless the whole time. You look into their eyes, and there was nothing there. It was quite chilling, actually.
But as the trial progresses, police realise convincing the court of Bell's guilt may not be an open and shut case.
The case against Bell relied entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun. There was no witness who saw him kill Terry Edmonds.
I think that Philip Bell also had a very good defence barrister who was able to just chip away at the little bits of evidence.
It became really a massive trial. I was giving evidence for days on end.
And before long, Bell's defence team has a trick up their sleeve to try and raise doubts in the jury. They point the finger at another rough sleeper in the same car park, one of Bell's associates.
The man had a conviction for manslaughter. And because he lived in the car park, it was suggested by the defence that he was the murderer.
Not only that, but the defence's new suspect could undermine one of the team's key pieces of evidence, the footprint on the pink sheet used to smother Terry.
The man had a pair of Converse trainers found in his possession, which were linked to the pink sheet found at the scene, with a bloody footprint that matched that pair of trainers.
Following a dramatic trial lasting 6 weeks, the jury retires. After 22 hours spent deliberating, they failed to reach a verdict. For Kent Police and the prosecution team, their worst fears have come true.
All the evidence against Philip Bell, it seemed very strong. So it was very disappointing for Terry's mum not being able to get any justice, and for the rest of her family.
With no verdict reached by the jury, the judge orders a retrial. 7 months later, a second trial begins, and a brand new jury hears the case against Philip Bell.
But again, we had the same situation, with evidence being chipped away at by the defence team.
I was thinking, oh no, not again, because I was really concerned that it would be the same Groundhog Day kind of scenario.
This time, the defence focuses on Bell's hoodie. They claim there was an innocent explanation for Terry's blood on it.
They suggested that Philip Bell had brushed past the area where Terry's blood was and got it on his top. Again, I think that what they did was they raised a doubt about that, and the jury just couldn't be sure of it.
Following 19 hours of deliberation, the jury has news.
I think it's fair to say you could cut the atmosphere in that courtroom in Maidstone Crown Court with a knife.
Once again, a jury has failed to reach a verdict.
This is another massive blow for Terry Edmonds' family. They'd sat now through 2 lengthy trials.
There was, on my part, a real sense of shock and disappointment when the jury were unable to return a verdict, and then having to decide what we were going to do.
The team is on the verge of calling it quits.
Now, if we'd done that, Bell would have walked free, and Terry's killer would never have been brought to justice.
But in a last-ditch effort to save the case, the prosecution tries for something rarely attempted in British legal history. A third trial of the same defendant.
And so we argued that it was in the interests of justice to go a third time, which is unusual.
It was the right thing to do, that we had an overwhelming case, that Terry had been murdered by Philip Bell.
It's a close call, but the judge sides with the prosecution and agrees to keep Bell in custody until the retrial. So the team has one last chance to put Bell behind bars.
If the case fails, then he is going to walk free, and he could be dangerous.
So the prosecution goes back to basics. First, they tackle Bell's claim that he brushed past Terry's blood, left on the stairwell. Forensic scientists run tests using the same small amount of blood that was found on Bell's hoodie. This tiny amount would have started drying if he'd touched it after the attack.
So you can see that if the blood has started to dry quite considerably, the stains start to break up. They're quite gritty, they're quite flaky.
But the stain on Bell's top seemed fresh, questioning his version of events.
The blood stain on the hooded top was not flaky, it was fresh-looking blood that had been transferred, so it demonstrated that it wasn't drying blood. So that blood must have transferred very quickly after it was available, which started to put Philip Bell being involved in the assault on Terry Edmonds and being exposed to her blood after she was injured.
Not only is the forensic evidence building better than before, this time the prosecution have also found a new star witness who has come forward to the police.
A 15-year-old girl came and gave her account about how she had been invited to go to the stairwell that Philip Bell was staying in.
And quite chillingly, she described what we believed had happened to Terry, her being straddled by him and being bruised by him and him trying to assault her. But very fortunately for her, somebody came and disturbed them and she was able to escape.
That was just exactly how we imagined that the attack had taken place on Terry.
And you could hear a pin drop. It was compelling evidence, and it showed in law that he had what we call a propensity to commit this type of offence.
As the prosecution's case seems to get stronger, Bell's testimony on the stand just falls apart. He admits being on the stairwell landing at the time of Terry's attack, but says he saw nothing.
He's within 10 feet of Terry being murdered and yet sees and hears nothing. It was fanciful.
So a jury considers the evidence against Bell for a third time. Just 3 hours later, they announce their decision. Guilty.
It was a day of jubilation, really, for the family. There were loud shouts and cheers as the verdict was announced in Maidstone Crown Court.
There was an outpouring of pent-up emotion that had been there for a long period of time.
It was extremely satisfying when we were able to hear the guilty verdict and realise that we'd achieved some sort of justice for Terry's family.
Philip Bell is eventually sentenced to 28 years in jail.
He was evil. That's how the judge described him after the trial, and that's a fair description of him.
Justice is a consolation for the family, but it will never bring their beloved daughter back. Terry was a bright, intelligent girl, and she had a long life to look forward to that was cruelly taken away by Philip Bell, for no reason, really.
And the case has left its mark on the quiet Kent town of Tunbridge Wells.
I think Tunbridge Wells has never really got over the murder of Terry Edmonds, and I think the wounds are still there in Tunbridge Wells because Terry was part of our community and a lovely young woman. You could feel that fear and sadness that this had happened in our town.
The threat has resurfaced, placing the very thing everyone needs to survive under attack. It's a waterfall of bad news for Cobra in new cyber war on Sky Mix, Thursday at 9.
A woman in
in a little English village walking her dog. These were circumstances which people would think were nightmarish.
It broke a family. It caused the most horrendous shockwaves to a community.
You could sense that a village like this wasn't used to crime of that degree.
There was no possibility that he could be tried again for that offence.
I think it gave him this powerful energy that he used to terrorise people. His behaviour was vile.
This was a historic ruling in terms of double jeopardy.
It was legally groundbreaking.
It was high stakes. This was the first in the country.
He clearly thought he'd effectively got away with it.
Ascot under Wychwood, a pretty picture postcard village that's home to just 500 residents. This peaceful, rural parish lies in the Evenlode Valley in Oxfordshire.
Ascot under Wychwood is a small village. Lots of villagers will have been here for many, many years. There will be families that have had descendants that have grown up in the village, and people know each other, that people look out for one another. It really is a tight-knit community where people generally know what's going on.
You know, if you drove through a village, you'd say, oh, this is a really nice place to live. You know, very idyllic, nice people, and a place where you perhaps also feel quite safe.
In this idyllic Oxfordshire village lives mum of two, Vicky Thompson.
Vicky was an absolutely delightful mum, wife, and, you know, loved her family, great family unit. People that came into contact with her, you know, equally found her delightful. You know, she was a lovely, kind lady.
Vicky was a key part of the village community, as many people were. People would have known her in the village, and clearly living a nice, quiet life in the Oxfordshire countryside.
She's often seen out walking her beloved dog, Daisy.
She loved the fact that she could just, you know, come out of her front door and within moments she'd be surrounded by fields, you know, with a dog and the children. So, you know, for her, I think it was a perfect place for her to bring up her family.
But Vicky's perfect idyll is about to change. Vicky had just celebrated her 9th wedding anniversary with her husband in the village pub where she worked. So on the Saturday, they take it easy, relaxing in the garden.
It was a pleasant day, the weather was beautiful, so it was a typical, you know, idyllic weekend really that, you know, that's what families sort of strive for.
In the afternoon, Vicky decides to take collie Daisy out for a walk.
It would have been about 3:45, 4 o'clock when she set off at a regular time down the same country lane, across a little bridge over the river that ran through the village, to walk Daisy down to Shipton Lane, it was called, and to come back.
It's typical of a village lane in this sort of area, perfect for walking the dog, and I'd imagine it was a well-worn route for Vicky and many other dog walkers in the area.
But today, Vicky's dog Daisy does something quite unexpected.
The first that anyone was aware that something was wrong was when Daisy came back.
And then, unfortunately, when the dog returned without her, that's when alarm bells started to ring.
As time goes by, with no news from Vicky, concern starts to set in.
Vicky's husband went out, started looking, spoke to neighbours, spoke to friends, and then, you know, you almost naturally go into a sort of second phase of now starting to do a bit of a search, which is exactly what happened. So it sort of morphed into more of a search and thinking something's not quite right.
Vicky's husband assembles a small search team of family, friends and neighbours. They retrace her steps on her regular walk down Shipton Lane in the desperate hope of finding her.
One of those who were looking for her did notice some bloodstains on the surface of the path, but they thought that they were the blood of a sheep or something of that kind. They didn't think much of it at that time, so they went back to the village, and it was only when she still didn't return and they went back again that they looked at the bloodstain more carefully and came to realise that it was quite fresh, that beneath the congealed surface it seemed still to be wet. But much more importantly, nearby they then found some broken pieces of jewellery which were very quickly identified as hers. And that then became a source of real alarm, and I think it was that discovery which prompted the first call to the police.
Finding that jewellery, all that did was, I think, heighten the sense of nervousness within those that were looking for Vicky at the time.
As police make their way to the scene, the frantic hunt continues for Vicky. Her husband and neighbours are terrified she's clearly come to some harm. They make their way further down the lane.
This is Shipton Lane. We've got the lane itself, and then to the right you can see the train track, and they must have really panicked and must have been desperate in time to find her, and it wouldn't have taken them too long once they'd realised that she was no longer on the path to scour the local area.
3 hours after Vicky went missing, they spot something sinister.
They noticed a gap in the hedge that ran alongside the lane where the bloodstaining and the jewellery had been found. And when they went over to the gap, which led into a nearby agricultural field that was bordered by the embankment of the railway line, they could see something in the distance that looked out of place, and they made their way across the field.
And they would have found her in a bad way here.
To their horror, Vicky's lying on the ground, with blood covering her face and head. When her husband tries to speak to her, she's drifting in and out of consciousness.
She was clearly in a very bad way. He spoke of her mumbling, and he tried to keep her talking and tried to keep her coherent. I believe she could name the name of their son.
Something ominous close by suggests this is foul play.
There was a stone there nearby. She'd obviously been attacked. She was bleeding, and to discover her like that is quite a harrowing experience, really. But Vicky was found, and she was found alive.
Her husband asked her, "Who did this to you?" But he just couldn't quite make out what she was saying. She was clearly in a very bad way and clearly very seriously injured.
She was certainly not able to say what had happened, still less to identify who was responsible.
With Vicky's life hanging in the balance, an air ambulance is sent in response to airlift her from the scene.
Time was of the essence to call in an air ambulance. That must have meant that she was clearly very gravely injured. And so she was airlifted to hospital.
She's flown straight to Oxford's John Radcliffe Hospital, which specialises in treating brain injuries.
She'd suffered multiple blows with a hard object to her head, which had caused skull fractures and serious brain damage.
As police secure the crime scene, their minds turn to the violent attacker on the loose.
Had Vicky been in a position to talk, there is no doubt that she'd have said exactly who'd attacked her, because of course everyone knew everybody. Sadly, she wasn't able to do that.
With no immediate suspect in the frame, the fear of an attacker living in their tight-knit community is the talk of the village.
People think that it could have been them, that it seemingly there's no targeting, that perhaps this was just a random attack on any dog walker. It could have been them. And I think that probably did strike home to the local community and perhaps the wider community in the county and beyond.
Within the community, there's no doubt that it was colossal. You know, that fear of crime can be just as powerful. And when you've got a small community that has been completely rocked by what unfolded, there's no doubt that it impacted that community severely.
Over the next 6 days in intensive care, Vicky Thompson fights for her life.
Her condition quite quickly deteriorated, and she died a few days later. And the cause of her death was blunt force head injury.
It's the news no one in the quiet village of Ascot under Wychwood wants to hear. Vicky's violent assault has now become murder.
As a reporter, I've covered many incidences of dog walkers being attacked, and they strike a chord with people. But when it develops into a murder, then I think it really does chill people locally.
In the quiet Oxfordshire village of Ascot under Wychwood, mum of two, Vicky Thompson, has been brutally attacked whilst out walking the dog, and dies 6 days later from her injuries. With Vicky's violent killer still at large, her community and the wider public are in shock.
The profile of the case, of course, was substantially enhanced by where it took place, because this was a late summer's afternoon, a woman in a little English village walking her dog. These were circumstances which, upon reading them, people would think were nightmarish. This was not something that was supposed to happen. And I think for that combination of reasons, it very quickly attracted a great deal of publicity.
So the pressure's on for Thames Valley Police to track down Vicky's brutal attacker.
This is the area where the incident occurred, and it is typical of an Oxfordshire village. We're on the edge of the Cotswolds, and it is a lane. You can clearly see why it was popular with dog walkers. It's the kind of lane that's quite overgrown. It's the kind of area that someone who didn't want to be seen could perhaps sort of conceal themselves and look as people walked along. We've got the railway line to my right here, the embankment, which is where Vicky was found.
Since the assault, police have been sweeping the area, looking for clues that could lead to the killer.
Looking at the lane, looking at the jewellery that was found, it was a view that perhaps where she was found wasn't necessarily where she was ultimately attacked at the time.
Scenes of crime officers retrace the killer's steps, back to the bloodstains on the path where they believe the attack happened.
As with all crime scenes, that becomes the most fundamental starting point of your investigation. Because what's left behind is what you need to try and secure.
At the attack scene, clumps of blood-stained hair are found on nearby rocks.
Vicky was clearly struck about the head with a blunt instrument, potentially a rock or a stone, and clearly suffered very serious head injuries. It then appears that she was moved somehow, perhaps dragged over towards a railway line.
Although the attack happened in broad daylight, investigators have got their work cut out finding any witnesses.
This is the Cotswold line. It is a pretty quiet line. There isn't a main line. There won't be too many trains coming past at any time of day. And so no one would have really witnessed it. There wouldn't be too much passing traffic.
Police are also trying to work out why Vicky was dumped by the railway line.
Potentially moving Vicky's body or moving her unconscious body towards the embankment might have concealed what had happened, that potentially it might have been made to look like an accident, but there was no real motive put forward for why she was moved closer towards this railway embankment.
But 200 metres from the scene of the attack, officers make an intriguing find.
In a hedge was found a plastic bag which contained 2 items of ladies' underwear that were discovered to have been contaminated with semen. This was obviously a hugely significant find, both because of what it was and because of where it took place.
Although the underwear does not belong to Vicky, it's sent off to the lab for DNA analysis. Meanwhile, police continue the hunt for potential witnesses to the attack. 2,500 people would eventually be interviewed in the surrounding area.
A huge amount of work was done. House to house was done, lots of statements taken. Because unless you start to build up a picture, you can only do that by engaging with the community. And so it was a significant, large investigation, treated as a serious investigation right from the very outset.
But in the village, one name starts coming up on the doorstep. 20-year-old odd job man, Mark Weston.
And there's those that, are mischievous and those that are perhaps, trouble. Mark Weston was trouble, not mischievous, he was trouble. And the investigation identified Mark Weston as a key suspect, and they had every reason to do so.
And police are told Weston is often seen on the path leading towards the crime scene, Shipton Lane.
He used to go down there. I mean, this is a chap, we've got to bear in mind, he didn't have a day job. He hanged around. So this place was a sort of regular haunt. There was lots of witnesses that would place him on this lane because it was a regular thing for him to do.
Through door-to-door inquiries, 4 separate villagers tell police they saw Weston heading towards Shipton Lane just before the approximate time of Vicky's attack. The local post office clerk claims she saw him looking alarmed, covered in sweat, and running away from the village only an hour later.
Some witnesses had come forward and said that they'd seen him acting strangely. It became very clear, as a result of the inquiries that went on, that Weston became a suspect.
So police pay a visit to Mark Weston. On the morning of the murder, he claims he went fishing and shopping, but was at home all afternoon during the time of the attack. 3 days later, when police question him again, his story changes, and he says he was at home all day. 5 days later, it's a different story. Weston claims he actually left his house at 5 p.m, not long after the attack, to call on his neighbours who weren't in. But Weston's neighbours beg to differ. They say they had been at home at the time Weston said he'd visited and had never seen him. For police, something doesn't stack up.
There are conflicting reports about where he was. All this sort of stuff was coming in that conflicted with what Mark was saying. It would be right to look at him very carefully. But looking very carefully is one thing. Having the evidence to support an arrest is another.
But when scenes of crime officers search his garden 4 weeks after the murder, they find the charred remains of a sweatshirt or jacket that he's attempted to burn.
As the investigation went on, other evidence started becoming apparent about, the burning of clothes. And so there's a few things that led the investigation to Mark Weston.
Today, police have arrested a 20-year-old man in the investigation into the murder of Vicky Thompson.
As the evidence builds, Mark Weston is arrested and taken in for questioning. He maintains his story, that he was at home at the time of Vicky's attack. Meanwhile, police search his house, seizing some of his clothing, including a pair of his boots. They are sent off for forensic analysis. The results come back to the senior investigating officer.
The SIO at the time asked the question, was there blood on this boot? The answer came back, no. You can't do any more with that. The question's been asked, and the answer was given.
Weston is released, and the police continue their inquiries. But soon, the lab has more news, and this time it could turn the case on its head. The lady's underwear found near the crime scene has a DNA result for the body fluids found on them. It matches Mark Weston.
That became a key piece of evidence. It linked Mark Weston to the scene, no question at all.
In Ascot-under-Wychwood, Oxfordshire, police have a prime suspect for the murder of mother of two, Vicky Thompson. DNA linked to Mark Weston is found in a bag of ladies' underwear close to the attack scene. With this new key evidence, police now believe they've established a motive.
He quite possibly was seen by Vicky performing a sex act and perhaps reacted angrily to Vicky, perhaps accosting him and asking him what's going on, and then things escalated from there.
I mean, would he really want the village to be aware that he was behaving like that, which was perverse activity?
I think he was threatened with humiliation and possibly worse. And I think the initial violence that he used was in temper and spontaneous. Once things start to go wrong, they get worse. And I'm afraid I think that's what happened here.
As Weston is put under the spotlight, more evidence is uncovered, linking to the bag of underwear found near the attack scene.
During a search of a narrow watercourse that ran down the back of the gardens of the houses in the street where he lived was another plastic bag in which were found other items of ladies' underwear which had been placed there or an attempt had been made to conceal them after the day of the attack. He did not want items of ladies' underwear to be found in his home which would connect him to the scene, and so he had separately disposed of those so as to prevent that connection from being made.
Although none of this underwear belonged to murder victim Vicky, police can now see Weston's trying to hide a sordid secret.
It was the underwear of women who lived in the village, and it had been taken from their washing lines, and he was using it for a sexual purpose. His reputation in the village from that day onwards would have been destroyed. I think there would have been an element of ridicule in it for him, and it might well be that he just couldn't bear the thought of that.
It seemed from the evidence that Mark Weston perhaps had a troubling relationship with women and perhaps fixated on some women locally. We will never know.
Today, a 20-year-old man has been charged with the murder of Vicky Thompson.
6 months after Vicky Thompson's brutal killing, Mark Weston is charged with her murder. Then, in November that same year, he finally faces trial at Oxford Crown Court. But before the case barely gets underway, the prosecution's dealt a serious blow.
I think the police and perhaps the Thompson family felt very aggrieved that the judge presiding over the trial ruled inadmissible some key evidence, and that was our bag found with 2 pieces of underwear containing DNA from Weston very near the scene. That was ruled inadmissible. The jury couldn't know about that.
With little other evidence proving Weston's inappropriate sexual behaviour, the judge believes this one piece of proof could unfairly sway the case.
The judge felt it just wasn't fair for Weston that he would get a fair trial if that was admitted. And I've got no doubt having that judge make that direction would have been hard to be accepted. But the law is there to protect everybody, whether you're a victim or an offender, to make sure, from an offender's perspective, that you get a fair trial.
But police have now lost their vital evidence linking Weston to the crime scene.
And so a key bit of evidence, a key bit of fact-finding from the police was ruled out at a stroke.
It is unfortunate that that wasn't admitted as evidence. It would have been crucial. It would have significantly helped the Crown's case.
As the trial continues, the prosecution case never recovers.
There have always been discrepancies and inconsistencies in the accounts which he gave at the time about his movements, but none of that was sufficient to prove an opportunity for him to have been where she was in order for him to have carried out the attack. And in the absence of a piece of evidence which could clearly establish that, it was always going to be difficult.
Following a trial lasting 14 days, the jury retires to consider the case. To the court's surprise, they return in just 50 minutes. The verdict? Mark Weston is not guilty. It's a body blow for the police and Vicky's family.
An acquittal in 50 minutes or so is fairly rare in my experience, and so clearly the jury in that original trial just didn't feel there was the evidence there to convict Mark Weston.
An acquittal so quickly after retirement was interpreted as a declaration of innocence, a statement by the jury not merely that it hadn't been proved that it was him, but that it very definitely wasn't him.
It is very disappointing when a jury does come back and return a verdict of not guilty, when you know and you strongly believe that that person is guilty.
The case was thrown out very quickly, and so the police and Thompson's family and friends clearly walked away from the Crown Court that day very disappointed indeed.
They made their decision at the time that had to be accepted.
Mark Weston even appears on local news to boast about his acquittal.
Cleared of murder, Mark Weston is this morning back with his family.
Well, I've done nothing wrong, but they still kept saying it was me, knowing it wasn't. But now they've come to realise they had the wrong person.
And to add salt to their wounds, Thames Valley Police comes under fire from the unlikeliest of places.
Following the acquittal, one of the jurors felt sufficiently strong about what they had observed during those proceedings to write directly to Mr. Weston, suggesting that he might sue the Thames Valley Police for a wrongful prosecution.
Although Weston secures legal aid to do this, his case runs out of steam. So he turns to other ideas of how to seek revenge.
There's a thought that you might quietly just go back and just be perhaps under the radar. Weston was none of that. When he got acquitted, I think he had a sense of empowerment.
He acted with impunity after that. He moved back into the community And he taunted the community, perhaps in some ways, and literally harassed people who'd been involved in that original trial. He didn't try to fade away.
Barely a year later, Weston launches a campaign of harassment against the village bobby who helped investigate the case. Day and night, he makes up to 50 silent phone calls to the PC, his wife and their 2 daughters.
He terrorised the officer. And bearing in mind, that's how we policed. You know, we're in that community, we're part of the community, because you are a member of the village. And I've been there, and it's lovely. But the thought of then being terrorised is just harrowing.
After police put video surveillance on the village phone box and record Weston's phone calls, he's convicted for harassment. Weston is sentenced to a 2-year conditional discharge and a restraining order. So next, Weston moves on to another villager who also provided evidence in his murder case.
I believe he put some posters up around the village and he made remarks about people being a grass, and clearly he went on the offensive.
Weston shines lights into his neighbour's house and posts threatening notes through her door. Mark Weston is convicted of harassment once again. He's sentenced to 100 hours of community service.
This empowerment, I think, overwhelmed him. So he became very vexatious. I am permitted to do this because actually I've been acquitted. I think it gave him this powerful energy that he used to terrorise people. His behaviour was vile.
He was perhaps a little bit arrogant. He didn't feel that he was under any threat from being hauled back to court. The law at the time meant that he couldn't be retried for the same offence, and so he clearly thought he'd effectively got away with it.
But a change of law on the horizon would soon give the investigators new hope.
Why? Because we knew, without question, that Mark Weston killed Vicky.
Ascot under Wychwood, Oxfordshire. In spite of proof linking Mark Weston to the murder of villager Vicky Thompson, he's acquitted in court. And the so-called double jeopardy law means Weston will never face justice again, even if new evidence comes to light.
It was a horrific attack, and her family must have been deeply troubled by no one having been convicted of her murder.
But in 2003, there's fresh hope.
Parliament passed an act which abolished the common law rule of double jeopardy, permitting, in limited circumstances, the prosecution for a second time of the same individual for the same offence.
2 years later, on the 10th anniversary of Vicky's tragic murder, Thames Valley Police's cold case review team reopens the investigation, with then Detective Superintendent Barry Halliday leading the unit.
That was typically one of the cases that was immediately identified as needing to be reviewed.
That didn't mean it was easy for prosecutors to bring another case. It was, in fact, there was a very high bar for the prosecution to succeed. They'd also need compelling, fresh, new evidence. They knew that a murderer had walked free after that initial trial, and they just needed that one piece of evidence to get him, to nail him, to get their man.
The light bulb moment for investigators comes from another high-profile case that hit the headlines 5 years earlier. The murder of Peckham schoolboy, Damilola Taylor.
The senior police officer was attending a lecture and how, upon the first investigation of the death of that little boy, highly incriminating bloodstains had not been detected upon items of clothing being examined by scientists during the investigation, and how difficult it is sometimes to find them.
So detectives try and hunt down any of Weston's belongings that weren't returned to him following the first investigation. They're in luck. Weston's boots are found in one of the Force's exhibit stores. Could they contain that golden nugget of proof police desperately need?
There was no harm in sending those boots back in. Fresh pair of eyes, fresh forensic opportunities, and testing and examination, and just be sure that there was no forensics on those boots.
In the 10 years since the boots last saw the light of day, forensic techniques have massively evolved.
The changes in procedures for searching for blood would involve a change in the sorts of lights that we regularly use. We now use a fibre optic lamp, and that has a halogen bulb in it. Previously, people just used perhaps an overbench light with a tungsten bulb in it. And we know that that change in lighting is much better for looking for bloodstains. The other change is that we will more regularly use a low-power microscope to search an item for blood, whereas previously that wasn't routinely used.
So scientists put Mark Weston's boots under the microscope to see if the tiniest spot of blood had been missed the first time round. The fact that they are black proves to be the greatest challenge.
People think of bloodstains as being bright red. Well, they are when they're fresh, but they very quickly change their appearance. They darken.
The blood doesn't show up readily on a black surface. There are also lots of nooks and crannies, and it has a very intricate surface, so it's a difficult item to examine, and I think even a careful and diligent scientist could miss blood if they weren't examining it under optimum conditions.
But soon, forensic scientists hit the jackpot.
We found some blood staining on Mark Weston's boots, and DNA profiles were obtained from that blood, and those matched Vicky Thompson. That was really the significant moment in this case. It was the turning point.
It's the news the cold case team have been longing for.
The case was never closed. And to get a moment like that where you're told that all that hard work that your team has ploughed into and actually you get fundamental evidence is euphoric.
They'd finally found that smoking gun, that real piece of evidence that they needed to seal the conviction that they thought they should have sealed years earlier.
After 4 years spent rebuilding their case, police swoop in to re-arrest Mark Weston.
He was absolutely, frankly furious. You know, he was adamant, arrogant, can't believe this is happening to me again. You know, that sort of behaviour. So all the evidence was presented to him, including the overwhelming evidence of the blood of Vicky on his own boots. Absolutely no response from him at all, accepting any responsibility or liability for Vicky's death. A complete and utter denial.
But the police aren't home and dry with a prosecution yet. Next, they have to convince a court of appeal. And these are uncharted waters. It's one of the first times a double jeopardy case has been heard before the court.
Our case was made very strongly, and then there is that huge sense of nervousness whilst you're waiting for the decision.
After weeks of waiting, police and prosecutors finally get news.
given how compelling the evidence was, the Court of Appeal made the decision that it was in the interests of justice for Mr. Weston to be tried again, and his acquittal was quashed.
That was agonising, waiting. But the news came back. You are elated.
It was a great moment when we heard that the Court of Appeal had overturned the acquittal. This was a historic ruling in terms of double jeopardy and introducing new scientific evidence.
5 months later, Weston finally hears the murder case against him for a second time.
There was a real sense that Thames Valley Police had been given a second chance here, and so there was a sense of tension that the police were gambling in a sense, that this was their final throw of the dice.
It was high stakes. The tension was immense, and Weston continued to be as arrogant as ever.
But this time, the discovery of underwear near the crime scene linked to Weston is allowed to be heard in court. It's clear even he can't explain away the overwhelming evidence against him.
There wasn't going to be much anybody could do about the fact that her blood was found on his boots. The scientific evidence this time round was simply unanswerable.
Perhaps he knew that his time was finally up, and that last piece of evidence was crucial, and he couldn't fight this any longer.
But Weston's fate is once again in the hands of the jury as they retire to consider their verdict.
The trial was absolutely extremely intense. That wait was probably the most sensitive, nervous time I've ever experienced.
The jury delivers their verdict. Mark Weston is finally found guilty of Vicky Thompson's murder. 15 years after her death, the judge jails him for a minimum of 13 years.
This arrogant man, this man who'd sort of taunted those who tried to bring him to justice, was finally behind bars.
It's a relief to the husband who comforted his dying wife after Weston's vicious attack.
It doesn't bring back his wife, and nothing can, of course, but it was the verdict they wanted.
It was big, it was significant, but let's not lose sight of the real fact here. The real fact here is Vicky lost her life. She shouldn't have done. It broke a family.
And the police came to the flat and they arrested Nikki Collingbourne, and she was taken to a local police station. Having interviewed her, it wasn't long before I think they realised that there wasn't any substance to the complaint, and she was released from custody, allowed to go home, and in fact nothing further was ever done in respect of that complaint.
But whilst Nikki was busy explaining herself to local police, it seems Yvonne was taking her revenge for being evicted.
While Nikki was being questioned, Yvonne paid a locksmith to break in, basically. She proved that she'd lived there because obviously she had paperwork to say that that was her address, but obviously she wasn't on the tenancy. And so the locksmith, he had no idea, because she was very manipulative. She just pulls the wool out over everyone's eyes.
Whilst Nikki was in custody with the police, Yvonne stole loads of stuff.
Once inside Nikki's flat, it seemed Yvonne stole some of her half-sister's belongings, something Nikki discovered when she arrived home.
Well, she immediately reported what had taken place to the police, that her sister had let herself in to what was Nikki's home without permission, and Yvonne Kaler was arrested as a result of that complaint.
But Yvonne seemed determined to wheedle her way out of trouble.
Yvonne Kaler was now in big trouble. She was facing a burglary charge and a trial at the Crown Court. She approached Nikki's ill, elderly mother in an attempt to persuade her to say that the property that she'd taken belonged to her.
She was subsequently charged with offences of burglary and doing acts tending and intended to pervert the course of justice, and those proceedings, that case was due to be tried at the Crown Court at Cambridge.
While awaiting her day in court for burglary, Yvonne was released on bail on the condition she didn't contact Nikki.
She breached those conditions. She would phone her up, try and make contact with her, and did so in such a way as to cause considerable alarm to Nikki.
Nikki was certainly living in fear of Yvonne due to the burglary and perverting the course of justice.
I think she was just hoping that Yvonne would get on a plane and go back to America and just leave her in peace, because wherever she went, she was always looking over her shoulder, and yeah, it wasn't very nice for her to see her like that. She'd gone completely within herself. It's not bubbly anymore.
Yvonne's trial for burglary and perverting the course of justice was listed for May 23rd. Her half-sister Nikki was due to give evidence against her, something which police believe made Yvonne carry out her deadly plan.
Yvonne Kaler is a very controlling and manipulative person. She likes to be in control. However, once she's charged with burglary and perverting the course of justice, the court process is out of her control. So to try and wrestle that control back, she's been very, very callous in planning and executing the murder of her stepsister.
The court hears how on the day she was due to stand trial for burglary, Yvonne donned her disguise and entered the flat where Nikki lived, approaching her door.
Then this shocking scene of the door being opened, and what we surmised from the way that she was dressed and the towel and the half-full bath is that Nikki had been in the bathroom with a towel wrapped round her, with just her underwear on. She was preparing to have a morning bath. She heard the doorbell go. She opened the door, and as she recognised it was her sister, she would have been really frightened and shocked at the realisation of seeing that, although it was her sister was disguised in this bizarre way, and I think she would immediately have known that she was in really serious danger. And there was a struggle at the door. And as you watched it, there were that awful couple of seconds where it looked as though she was just about to get the door shut, before finally it was forced open and Yvonne Kaler went in, and then the door shut behind her. And then 2 hours of nothing.
Once inside the flat, the prosecution claims Yvonne and Nikki argued in the kitchen, and as Nikki turned to walk away, Yvonne attacked her.
The chicken dish would have been picked up by two hands and used with considerable force, and Nikki would have been walking away from that. Certainly was enough to render her unconscious.
Then Yvonne panicked and tried to stage the scene.
There's been an attempt made to make this look like a suicide. So there was injuries to Nikki's wrists to make it look like she'd self-harmed. There was also a big tidy-up of the flat, and including the staging of placing a dustpan brush in Nikki's left hand.
Having tried to make it look as though Nikki had cut herself on the broken pot and bled to death while trying to clear it up, Yvonne is once again caught on CCTV leaving the flat.
She was carrying some plastic bags that she hadn't had with her when she arrived, so she clearly had some property in the bags. One of the things which we consider she did when she left, and which was in the bag, were some of the remnants from the casserole pot that had been used. Because one of the things the police did was they put it all back together again. It was like a 3D jigsaw. But what it demonstrated once they'd done it was that there were a number of the pieces missing. We surmised that she'd realised that there was her blood on the broken pieces, and she had taken those which she could find with bloodstains on them in the plastic carrier bag. But unfortunately for her, unfortunately for us, she left a couple behind.
When Yvonne Kaler was shown the CCTV footage, her reaction was one of denial.
Yvonne, do you recognise the person in that CCTV?
Look, bow-legged, fat, bow-legged to me. I'm fat, but I'm not bow-legged. It looked like a man to me. I couldn't see his face.
As the trial progresses, Yvonne continues to deny her involvement. Then the prosecution calls a new witness.
Actually, the worst moment thinking about it through the trial was when they brought prisoner to give evidence against Yvonne.
We found out that there was a prisoner that Yvonne had spent some time with while she was on remand. She was going to be released quite soon.
She decided to draw a map of my flat and try and bribe a prisoner that was being released to set fire to my flat, knowing that my daughter was living here at the time with my 2 grandchildren.
She had this idea that if she gave her some of her DNA, I think it was blood, on a cotton bud or something, that she could leave the evidence there and set fire to it and say, well, someone's trying to frame me, because how would my blood be at a scene when I'm in prison? So someone's obviously framed me for the murder of Nikki.
But Yvonne's bizarre plan to try to suggest she had been set up for the murder didn't sway the jury. With all the facts presented to them, including the CCTV footage and the DNA evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
So at one point in the trial, I honestly thought it was going to go the other way. It was like almost like her defence was like making it kind of out like she couldn't have possibly done this, and like honestly, we honestly thought at one point maybe she's going to get away with this. Honestly, it's a really scary feeling. Even though we knew all the evidence was there, it's convincing that jury that she did that.
On December the 19th, 2016, Yvonne Kaler is found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years.
Yvonne Kaler could have accepted the burglary charges or gone to trial on the burglary charges and let the jury decide. But she decided not to. She hatched a plan, cold, calculated, and she killed Nikki Collingbourne rather than face a trial for burglary.
When the guilty verdict was read out, I think there was the biggest sigh of relief to know that she was going to be locked up and that we would just never have to have anything to do with her ever again, and that we could then tell our children that this bad person is now in prison and she can't touch any of us anymore.
After Nikki passed away, people would like come up to me and say how sorry they were, and they'd always have a memory of her helping them in some way. Like, she would literally go out of her way to help people. She loved to make people happy, and that's what Nikki lived for, because seeing other people happy made her happy. Like, I can't explain. She was just such a gentle soul.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Case on a lay-by just near the road.
People came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside was the remains of a person.
Local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here.
For a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was absolutely shocking for the community.
We had knowledge that he had over £270,000 worth of debt, and he was struggling to pay off those debts.
There was blood absolutely everywhere in that room, on the sofa, on the walls and on the ceiling.
through extreme measures, he used the alternative of planning the murder of his friend.
Tintwistle is an idyllic village nestled on the edge of the Peak District.
Tintwistle is a typical Peak District village. It's got a mixture of beautiful stone cottages. It's on the banks of the Longdendale Valley, and behind it are the Tintwistle Moors, known as the Nar and the Lower Moor. And it has stunning views over the Longdendale Valley and the 5 reservoirs.
A very parochial village where people can leave your back door open, no problems.
In Tintwistle, everyone knows each other. It's a very, neighbourly feel. It's a very close-knit community.
We've got a lot of people who have a lot of very good neighbours, and I think everybody supports each other.
In terms of crime rates in Tintwistle, it's fairly, non-existent.
But all this is about to change when the peace is shattered early one morning.
On the 10th of October, there was a 999 call received from dog walkers that had found a suitcase on a lay-by just near the road.
The location was on a main road that went between Manchester and Sheffield, and it dipped down a little bit into Derbyshire. It was a car park off the main road, but it was an area that was quite popular for walkers.
As you come into Tintwistle from the east, you go along what's called the Woodhead Pass, and this particular suitcase was dumped just over the wall as you go into the village beside the first reservoir.
As I remember, it's like this people passing by this lay-by and came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside the suitcase was the remains of a person.
Police are immediately dispatched to the area.
There's quite a long drive, really, from the point where I got the call to the point where I arrived at the scene. Just to give you some idea around the geography, when I first got the call, I was in Derby, which is here. The deposition site was all the way to the north of the county, to the north of Derbyshire, and as you can see, it's right at the very tip of the county.
Upon arrival, they are met with a gruesome sight.
It looks like the suitcase has been set on fire, and inside that suitcase we have a body of a man whose head has been removed, whose arms have been removed, and whose feet have been removed.
It was a Samsonite suitcase that was in an extremely charred state. But then it became apparent, and we had a human torso that had been extremely cruelly dismembered and burnt.
As a crime, this is really, really vicious. For somebody to remove all the limbs of a body, never mind commit the murder itself.
Derbyshire Constabulary launch a murder investigation, and news of the horrific find soon spreads around the village.
Oh, like chicken pox. Everybody talks about it, we all know about it. You go in the local shops. Have you heard?
In Tintwistle, it's a really neighbourly community. Everyone knows each other. If there's gossip, someone down the road will know about it in 10 minutes or so. Considering the crime rate was fairly non-existent for a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was completely shocking for the community.
I think local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here. I think, like all major crimes that happen in what everybody would regard as somewhere quiet and peace-loving, it adds to people's fear that something else could happen, or something else could happen as a result of it.
Police immediately cordon off the crime scene.
The big issue you've got here is you're out in the open. So there's two things. There's the weather, so rain can come and wash away your evidence. But secondly, you've got the issue of privacy. This is a really busy road, there's lots of traffic coming through, and you need to protect the privacy of that individual. That's really important.
Really what you want to do is secure and preserve as much evidence as you can. So there would have been things like identifying where the scene is, making sure that it was cordoned off, that there was enough police officers to ensure that nobody stumbled across the scene.
Beyond the scene, you might be looking at further searches. Has anything discarded, any clothing, any weapons, etc. So this particular point is very important from a forensic point of view. So you would want to be able to get some of your experts down, you want your crime scene manager, you'd really want your pathologist to be coming down to having a look at the scene, just so they have a full understanding of what's here, so that they can do a better job down the line.
And what I would do there is I'd have a discussion with the crime scene manager about the best way of removing the body to a hospital, but also making sure that we didn't lose any evidence while we were in that process, because the evidence that you might lose might be the only evidence that you get that helps you with the case.
Once you start moving a body, then the issue there is a potential loss of evidence, so there'll be some sampling requirements there and then, even in the circumstances where a body's been burnt. For example, there may well be fibres that have been transferred from the offender to the body, or alternatively to the suitcase that haven't been damaged. It's really important to pick those up at that point.
The body is removed, and police focus on one thing.
But I think when you look at the wider picture around this is somebody's life. This is that they've lost, and you know what I really want to do is find out who the family is, who are the relatives and the friends of this individual, and they need informing at the earliest opportunity.
This was going to be a huge challenge for the police now, because there's absolutely nothing to go by. They've just found a torso. There's nothing to identify the person, no fingerprints.
When you're looking at the difficulty presented by not being able to make an identification, the first things that we considered were things like the police database, and then we started looking at people who were missing, but because we had quite a wide geographical area, it was looking at people who were perhaps missing from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Greater Manchester, as well as Derbyshire. But it's an arterial route, could have been from anywhere.
With very little to go on, the pressure is on for the police to try to identify the body.
You head towards the things that you are quite confident that will bring about an identification, but then when the obvious start to go, then it progressively becomes more and more difficult, and you start considering any other locations or any other information that you may get that you think will help you identify who this person was. So it made it a really difficult inquiry, where we were having to be very, very precise around the investigative tactics that we used to try and find out who were the people who were involved.
Whilst the police await lab results from the pathologist's examination of the body, their attention turns to other lines of inquiry.
So the first point of call for the police now would have been to conduct local inquiries, asking people if they'd seen anything, if they'd heard anything.
When these things initially happen, all sorts of stories start to abound.
But the question on everybody's lips is, who is the victim?
Foremost in my mind was, there is a family somewhere whose loved one has been murdered, and they don't know about it.
In the picturesque Peak District, police have launched a murder investigation after an unidentified body was discovered in a suitcase which had been set alight.
So the condition of the body, when we found it, the head had been removed, both hands had been removed, and the feet had been removed. There were two things that I sort of realised quite quickly. One, that was a deposition site. That wasn't where the murder had taken place. That was where the body had been placed afterwards. And the second thing was, and it was around whether the victim and the offender knew each other. And I took the view that why would one take the steps to hide somebody's identity if they didn't know each other? So I sort of realised in my own mind that if I worked out who the victim was, I would be able to work out who the offender was. And if I worked out who the offender was, I'd be able to work out who the victim was.
Unable to identify their victim, police await the results of the post-mortem.
It's slightly unusual. There was no cause of death. So this tells us that there was no marks or scars or any wounds on the body parts that we had recovered, and clearly the victim's head had been removed. when we looked at the information that we did have from the post-mortem, this was a light-skinned male, and that's all that we were able really to glean from that. From the post-mortem, there were no marks, scars, tattoos or anything that would have assisted us making an identification.
Police trawl the missing persons database for any clues as to who their victim could be.
At the time, there was a lot of missing persons cases, so this could have been absolutely anybody.
There's quite a lot of missing people reported every single day in Derbyshire. And it was a case of refreshing those every single day, because the person may not be reported on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, but every single day going through the detail of who those individuals were and seeing if we could make a connection between the body that we got and that person who was missing.
With little to go on, Derbyshire Constabulary hold a press conference.
The purpose of today's press conference is to ask for the public's help to identify the victim. We are working with other forces to ascertain whether our victim may have been reported missing in a neighbouring county, but we recognise that he might not have been reported missing at all. We are therefore asking members of the public to come forward if they have not seen a neighbour or a friend or a colleague, or indeed any members of their family recently. A special call centre has been set up to take calls from across the UK, and we are urging people to provide information in relation to this murder investigation.
Information soon starts to filter into the police.
It became apparent that a number of dog walkers had seen the suitcase but hadn't realised exactly what was inside.
So in order to better understand the time frame that we're looking at and understand when the body may have been put in the car park, we did substantial inquiries with people who'd been on the road. We were asking for people who'd got dash cam footage or people that had driven past, and there were a few positive responses out of that, which were able to tell us that the fire had been set late the night before.
With 3 different drivers claiming to have seen a fire around 11:30 p.m. on the 9th of October, officers on the ground can now focus on who was in the area around that time, in a bid to identify the potential killer.
So that was really useful from the initial investigation point of view to be able to really narrow those timelines so you could concentrate on that time period and work out from there what the offender had done, where he'd been, where he'd likely to travel to and from.
Police now ramp up their inquiries.
There was a bolt out of the blue, and we got a conversation. We got a phone call in from South Yorkshire to inform us that there was actually an ANPR camera on the A628. So the phone call that we got on that day was, do you know you've got an ANPR camera on the 628? And no, we didn't, but thanks very much for telling us. That's really great.
Police immediately trawl through the automatic number plate recognition cameras to establish which vehicles had passed through the area on the night in question.
The police followed ANPR camera footage and located a Mercedes vehicle that triggered the camera just after 11 o'clock on Sunday the 9th, the evening before, and then didn't actually make it all the way across Woodhead Pass Road and to trigger the other ANPR camera at the other end.
It was the only vehicle that passed in the window of opportunity. So every other vehicle only went in one direction, either towards Manchester or towards Yorkshire.
All the vehicles, over 200 that had travelled along that road within the time period, down to one that had turned around and returned back to the Manchester area.
That was a strong indication that that vehicle was the one that deposited the body here on the night of the 9th.
After 10 days of round-the-clock investigations, and still having no clue as to the identity of their victim or suspect, this discovery is key.
The Mercedes triggered the camera on the evening before between 23:09 and 23:26. So straight away that was something I was very interested in, and we started to make some inquiries as to who might be the owner and what might be the significance of that vehicle.
This was absolutely key in the investigation. After 10 days of not finding anything, they needed to find out who this silver Mercedes belonged to.
As it happened, the vehicle didn't have any insurance, and so there was a reason to go and stop it and speak to the driver and have a look at the vehicle.
After further investigation, police discover that the vehicle is registered to someone living in Manchester.
So the owner of the vehicle was somebody called Ming Jiang.
Once the vehicle had been identified, it was registered to Ming Jiang, and therefore this triggered for the police to monitor him, make inquiries as to where he lived, inquiries of where he went.
There was so much pressure on the police. At this point in the investigation, it was very time sensitive. After 10 days, they really needed to find this person. At this point, the person who committed the crime could have run away, they could have covered up, or they could have very much so committed again.
Initial inquiries reveal Ming Jiang lives in Manchester, so Derbyshire Constabulary enlist the help of their colleagues over there.
When Greater Manchester Police assisted us, they were able to locate the vehicle, and because it was driven without any insurance, we were able to seize it. And when we seized the vehicle, we were then able to forensically examine it. And what I was looking for in that forensic examination was to find any evidence that might link to the body that we've got and the scene that we'd preserved some days before.
The police found a speck of blood in the rear that was the size of a 10p coin.
This was a really, really big moment in the investigation. What I would be looking to find out there is a blood spot in the boot of the vehicle the same as the blood that we found at the scene. So the DNA was sent away for comparison. It was the longest 24 hours I can imagine. Eventually it came back, and it came back with the news that we were really hoping for, and that was that the blood in the boot matched the DNA of the blood at the scene.
The blood match in the boot of the car puts Ming Jiang at the forefront of the investigation.
I felt this was the first time we were getting a breakthrough and first time we were getting an indication as to what may have taken place here. So as soon as we got the positive information about the DNA hit, it was a case of let's get this person arrested at the earliest opportunity.
So Ming Jiang was arrested on the 20th of October. They'd attended a casino in Manchester where they believed he was, and he was arrested at that location.
Now that the police have Ming Jiang in custody for questioning, time is of the essence to find evidence linking him to the murder.
What is also part of the inquiry is to start doing an evidential search around him to understand where he lived, what his movements were, and whether there was any other evidence that we'd be able to glean from his home address.
The police searched the home address and they found bloodstains all over the carpet. There was blood dispersion across all of the walls. They had been painted over and quite a shoddy clean-up had taken place. It was an extensive clean-up, but there was still blood throughout the flat and in the bathroom.
There was traces of blood absolutely everywhere that weren't immediately apparent to the eye, but there were things like the blood had seeped through the laminate flooring. There was blood that was soaked into the cushions on the sofa. There was blood on the walls and on the ceiling.
So the scene was a really rich source of evidence for us. The main evidence we got were 2 finger marks in blood. So we got one under a table, and the evidence you're really looking for there is the offender's fingerprint in the victim's blood. And getting that in 2 places was very, very critical evidence.
At this point, it's absolutely safe for the police to say that the murder took place in this apartment.
Ten days into the investigation of the body in the suitcase found in a Derbyshire village, police have discovered a car linked to the murder and have made an arrest.
A forensics team investigated the car. They swabbed the blood. This matched the torso that was found in the suitcase. So at this point, the police were then able to arrest Mr. Ming Jiang.
Forensic tests reveal the blood on the torso in the suitcase is a match for the blood in Jiang's flat in Manchester, making Ming Jiang their #1 suspect.
So the investigation moved over to Manchester because it became clear from the Derbyshire point of view that the offence had actually taken place in Manchester. As a result of their inquiries, that took them to the flat at Falconwood Way in Beswick. And as a result of what they found there, they felt very strongly that that was actually the place of the murder. And so as a result of that, that would then become a Manchester investigation.
But police are no closer to identifying their victim.
So as the inquiry goes on, the stress and the pressure builds. As a senior investigating officer, it's a privilege to do that role. But you do take the responsibility of having to investigate the death of somebody, and you owe that responsibility to the family of the victim. So I was really concerned about finding out who that was and getting that information to them at the earliest opportunity.
However, searches of their suspect and his car have led to a discovery.
When we did the evidential search of the Mercedes vehicle, we found some banking documents of another person called Yang Lu.
He had certain possessions on his person. At the time, he had his passport, he had his bank cards.
And that led us to an address in Salford at Media City. And there were some lines of inquiry that we needed to conduct at that address and find out what the relationship was with this person and how they fitted into the inquiry.
Police immediately sent officers to Yang Lu's address.
There was no answer, it was nowhere to be seen by anybody. So I made the decision that we were going to force entry into that apartment and find out really who this person was. So we forced entry into the address at Media City. Nothing particularly remarkable about the address, but what it did allow us to do was take some items from there which we knew the owner of that apartment would have left their DNA on. So very quickly we were able to send that away for analysis.
Finally, there is a breakthrough. Results come back matching Yang Lu's DNA to the torso, as well as the blood found in Ming Jiang's flat and car. Almost 2 weeks after the discovery, police have the name of their victim.
So what we did find out was that Yang Lu was a 27-year-old male, originally from China.
Yang Lu came to the UK in 2000 to study, where he went to the University of Leeds. His family actually worked really, really hard to save money so that he could study in the UK and achieve his goals and his dreams.
He finished his master's degree, and after that he stayed here and become a shares and stock trader.
He'd not brought any of his family with him over here, so if you look at the reasons why he may not have been reported missing, his family simply didn't know that he wasn't where he should have been.
Police now have the harrowing task of informing their victim's family.
This was a really difficult case from a family point of view. Under normal circumstances, we'd want to inform the family in person. And in the end, we actually had to make the call to the family in order to inform them. That's something that we wouldn't normally do under any circumstances, but unfortunately with the distance involved, we had no other option. I arranged for contact through Interpol with the Chinese authorities in order to let the family know. In the meantime, we allocated family liaison officers in order that we could make the process as smooth as possible.
Yang's family were absolutely devastated when they found out, their only son had been murdered. Not only murdered, but in such a vicious way.
And then they arrived in the UK in the second week of November.
Yang was very close to his family. They spoke on the phone near enough every single day. He actually vowed to go back to China and look after his family if one of them was to fall ill. And I think that just shows the tight-knit relationship they have, because he'd built himself this fantastic life in the UK and he was really willing to give that up to go back and look after his family.
When the family was here, then I helped them in different ways because they can't speak English. So most of the time that if they have something do not understand about the police procedure, and I help to explain them.
They were completely grief-stricken. They had lost their only son, who had come to the United Kingdom to study at university. He was a very clever young academic man and a very bright young man, and they were deprived of their son.
With time running out to hold their suspect in custody, police need to work fast to build enough evidence to charge him.
Ming Jiang is a danger to the public, and we would really want to be in a position where he'd be charged at that point. The secondary issue is he's a big flight risk. We'd be worried about him kind of moving back to China or elsewhere.
We had to prove that he was the person that had committed that murder. We knew he was involved and could prove that to the extent, and we then had to build a case.
There's no doubt that Ming Jiang tried to cover his tracks quite extensively, but the problem is there was just too much evidence. The evidence there in particular was extremely strong. It's almost the best evidence you can find at a scene, which was Yang Lu's blood and Ming Jiang's fingerprint.
Police now believe Ming Jiang murdered Yang Lu in his flat, dismembered his body, and dumped his torso in a suitcase before setting light to it. But they need to work out the link between the pair and establish when the murder happened, so trawl CCTV footage in the days leading up to the discovery of the suitcase.
CCTV footage revealed a man getting off the tram in Manchester. He crossed the road to meet another man and they went in the direction of a flat in Beswick.
That tram stop was the closest one to where Ming Jiang's home address was.
The male he met up with perfectly fit the description of Ming Jiang. And in addition to that, we had telephone evidence that showed the two phones of Ming Jiang and Yang Lu came together. And interestingly, from that point onwards, the phones always remained together. And that was the very last time that Yang Lu was seen.
With the evidence building, police make a decision.
So I authorised one charge of murder.
Ming Jiang denies any involvement in the murder, so the police and prosecution need to build a case for trial and establish a motive, meaning they have to delve deeper into the lives of the two men.
Yang Lu was definitely a responsible young man. He invested in stocks and shares, and he knew how to make money. He was very clever in that sense. He'd built himself this brand new life in the UK. He really had a bright future ahead of him. Yang really enjoyed gambling. He was a very big gambler. He'd go to casinos quite often. He always gambled within his means, though. He was never irresponsible in that respect. Even though he had the money to gamble, he never went above and beyond.
So Ming Jiang was in a very different situation to Yang Lu. Ming Jiang was originally from China. He moved over to the UK. He lived in the Beswick area in North Manchester. He rented that flat. At the time of the murder, he really was in serious debt problems. He'd spent quite a long time at casinos. He was a regular gambler. In fact, so much so that he had VIP status.
We believe that they met in a casino when they shared the same interest to gamble. They met in the Manchester casino.
But Yang Lu could never have imagined that their relationship could be so deadly.
Ming Jiang was very well known in the casino community. In some casinos, he had quite specialised status due to the large amounts of money that he was gambling. Yet in other casinos, he had markers on him due to his erratic and volatile behaviour. It was my understanding that he was a great fun guy to be around when he was winning, but it was a very, very different case when he was losing.
He lost a huge amount of money, and as far as we know, is sort of a £200,000 debt, and he's been chasing by the debtor, the creditor within the community.
It was the Crown's case that Ming Jiang had accrued extensive debts. We had knowledge that he had historically acquired over £270,000 worth of debt within 2 casinos. He was struggling to pay off those debts. We knew that he had pawned some wristwatches for over £15,000 to try and keep the debt.
gì?
Hỏi có gì ăn, hỏi cái kia. Bác gì đã sang. Thằng Long Vi như thế nó cũng chả dám cãi thằng Long Vi đâu.
Sao?
Con đấy nó không dám lấy thằng Long Vi đâu. Kiểu bọn đấy cãi nhau nó cũng buồn đến chết đây. Nó không kiểu dám lấy đâu. Tại thằng Long Vi được trai ạ.
Lý nữa cũng có cưới được đâu.
Con Linh thì tính cưới đấy. Nó không mồm nó kêu là không kiểu chắc gì cưới cho các thứ ấy. Nhưng nhìn kiểu đấy em biết là nó tính cưới rồi.
Yêu lâu thế. Em tính anh đấy thì cưới về cho chị hạnh phúc.
Mình nó nghe mẹ nó lắm đấy. Đúng kiểu chuẩn mama boy ấy. Con mẹ nó cũng ói on lắm. Không phải dạng vừa đâu.
Sợ rồi.
Con mẹ nó mới ói on ấy.
Sẽ tô ombre giữa hai màu này.
Sợ rồi.
Sợ chưa? Chết chưa?
Nghe mà sợ.
Nghệ đó, nghệ ít xí nhiều đó. Không đùa.
Lúc đầu em cũng không nghĩ cải, em tưởng thằng nó đi buổi tối nó mới sang cơ, ai ngờ nó mới là thằng trưa. Hoặc có thể là mỗi hôm mình không để ý.
Ấm áp quá trời, sao mùng 3.
Sợ là bọn đấy vẫn để nằm thế.
Nó ngại luôn á. Đúng cái kiểu mình muốn rồi đó.
Thằng không có động lực đấy.
Gì?
Em nói chị chừng có động lực rồi đấy.
Thằng Cảnh nó cũng đòi sang đây nó nằm giữa hai đứa mình á.
Rồi.
Thằng mất dạy.
Bao giờ vậy?
Trêu. Đúng. Tối sang nó làm giữa bạn với em bạn. Mà mẹ mày.
Sống mà. Nhận chị nó có chung hướng.
Đưa của bà sẽ có màu cam đậm hơn nha, xong rồi nó sẽ nhạt dần.
Nếu mà thằng Cảnh nó cho chị đeo ba lô, bắt chị đeo ba lô.
Đâu?
Hay chị dành đeo.
Lúc nào?
Lúc nó sang đây đó này, em thò đầu xuống.
À, lúc nó sang nó đeo ba lô xong rồi thì nó đeo tao ngồi kiểu gì?
Để em trước.
Xong sau khi mày thò đầu vào thì tao đút vào được trước nó. Mày đấy chứ mày chỉ thấy được một nửa của sự thật thôi.
Sợ rồi. Chắc phải nói chân lý hết, một nửa cái bánh mì à?
Đừng đùa. Tao đi học chiết ở đấy không bao giờ phải một mình mày học đâu.
Sợ mà.
Cái màu cam này nó hơi lệch nên mình sẽ tỉa thêm nha. Đều màu. Sợ nói bé quá.
To lên mất gì đâu.
Mất mát.
Mất giọng.
Sợ. Đây nha,